It's 11:59 at Gun Owners Radio, and this is the Penn Patriot, music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I've got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, and another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind American lines, this is your song.
Gun Owners Radio! Welcome, everybody. Happy Memorial Day. I hope that you spend this weekend doing something that you love, whether it's reflecting about the fact that it's Memorial Day or spending time with loved ones, friends, family. Whatever you do, make it safe, make it good, and hopefully you have a really great weekend. Gun Owners Radio, we make activism easy. That's our whole point. Today is May 25th, 2025. Thank you so much for watching the show. We just went over 10,000 subscribers. 10,000 subscribers. That puts us in the top like 3% of all YouTube, which is very, very cool. But we're not happy with staying at 10,000. In fact, we went over 10,000 on May 1st, and we're already up to 10,600 in less than a month. So we're not even a full month through, and we've already picked up another 600. But we need your help. We want to double this in the next 6 months. So all you got to do is hit that little subscribe button. That's all you got to do. And then tell your friends, hey, you know what? Found this cool podcast. Help them by subscribing. It's totally free. Takes almost no effort, takes no money, and you're really truly helping with the Second Amendment. We've been able to reach more and more people with the Second Amendment message, and we really do see that the growth of this show is really a reflection of what's going on in the Second Amendment world, which is empowerment. I mean, frankly, with all the good things that are happening, yeah, there's the occasional setback. Yeah, occasionally something doesn't go our way, but the trend is extremely positive, and it's something to be excited about. So if you could, subscribe, maybe leave a comment, and then consider joining the Pew Pew Crew, which Alicia's going to talk about in just a minute, and let us know what you want to see more of. We'd love to provide a show that's valuable to you, and like I said, make activism easy.
All right, so check it out. We have another jam-packed episode for you. This episode, we talked to an attorney about a guy who was prosecuted for shooting himself. And we also
prosecuted for shooting himself. How about that?
Right. Who knew? And we also talked to the founder of California Gun Rights Foundation. And we're also going to talk about some of the other important Second Amendment topics of the day. You don't want to miss it.
There you go.
All right. So Gun Owners Radio is located right here at Discount Gun Mart on Marina Boulevard. Check them out. Go to discountgunmart.com. And we want to just thank them for hosting us here. They have 2 locations to serve you here on Marina Boulevard as well as over in Santee. And check out gunownersradio.com and sign up to get our emails as well, so that you'll know what's happening in the Second Amendment community. All right. So before we dive in real quick, if you believe in what we are doing and want to help us to fight for the Second Amendment every single week, join the Pew Pew Crew, right? Mike teased about it. It's time for you to join. You join us here on YouTube. It's just a few bucks a month. You get exclusive perks, and it helps to keep the show growing strong. So just hit that join button and become part of the fight.
There you go. Awesome. The Pew Pew Crew.
Pew Pew Crew.
I love it. Rich came up with that name.
I was going to say, who came up with that catchy name?
He's all about the rhymes, that guy.
Like
just drop a beat and old Rich will throw down. So this has nothing to do with nothing, but I was watching a YouTube video. Have you seen those YouTube videos where they say 10 things you didn't know about XYZ movie, some movie, right? I love those. I have so much. What's funny is I'm not a big movie fan. I don't really like movies that much. I don't watch movies. But
just the one.
What do you mean?
Red Dawn.
Well, yeah, but that's a documentary. I'm talking about like movies, not like factual representations of actual history or future history. Mm-hmm. But like movies, I don't like just go see movies. I'm not a big movie guy. Yeah. Never really have been. But I love watching these, like things you didn't know about behind the scenes, whatever. I just kind of like it. So I'm watching this 10 Things You Didn't Know About Napoleon Dynamite.
Okay.
Now, Napoleon Dynamite is a movie I did like. I thought it was really cool. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, what the hell was that? Like, that's an hour and a half I'm never getting back.
Right.
But then it kind of sunk in. And I'm like, maybe I'll give it another try. And then I just loved it. For like 2 years, it was in pretty heavy rotation. I thought it was really entertaining. But the funny thing was, and they gave kind of 10 semi-interesting facts. But then at the end, the guy who is who claims, he says he's not shy about saying that he has like a mild form of autism. Like he says, he's on the spectrum.
Right.
He starts talking about how he actually liked the movie because it was a positive representation of people that were all on the spectrum. And I was like, wait, what? And here's the interesting thing. I think that they were all just normal people. Like in Napoleon Dynamite, like they were enormously normal people.
Right.
And I think what made that movie unique is that most movies, everyone's beautiful and rich and talented, and they say the right things, and whatever. These people weren't on the spectrum. It's just that we're kind of used to seeing in movies this hyper version, these superhumans, where everybody's near perfect. That when they showed a movie that was just kind of some normal people, they were like, what's wrong with these folks? Like, they're clearly on the spectrum, like there's something wrong. No, we're all just flawed, weird, awkward, don't know what to do. And,
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really interesting.
What's really ironic about that is I have a son who's autistic.
Yep. Yeah.
And and he is, fix this. He's an amazing young man.
Yeah.
And what was really freaking comical is one year he decided for Halloween he was going to be Napoleon. And he is one, he's never been one to do imitations or to do voices or to kind of have a funny character. He was all in.
Really?
Like all day. Like everything he said was in a Napoleon voice. He answered using the humor, and it was just so freaking funny. It was pretty great. He even found the moon boots. Like it was perfect.
Am I wrong then? Like,
No.
do you think that Napoleon Dynamite possibly was a representation of someone that was on the spectrum?
I honestly didn't take it that way.
Yeah.
But now that you've said that, I guess I can kind of see it. But I didn't take it that way.
I would concede.
I think we're all quirky and fun in our own way.
Yeah, but I would concede if someone was just like, yeah, man, clearly Napoleon Dynamite was on the spectrum. I would maybe concede that. But Deb and Pedro and even Uncle Rico, I don't think they were on it. You know what I mean?
No.
They were just normal small town people.
Right.
That was actually kind of the brilliance of the movie. Is they found interesting what was interesting is just how mundane they were.
Right.
That's what was interesting. They you weren't quite sure, was this shot in the 80s or 90s? Like,
Right.
No,
They did a
it
great
was
job.
modern day. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Nothing to do with guns.
I will say, my son being autistic
Yeah.
did not like guns for a long time. It was overwhelming. It was tough. It was hard. It was loud. He loves it now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Good.
Yep. He likes to go.
All right. What's it time for now?
It is now time for the gun truth of the week.
Gun truth of the week. Okay, this one's pretty interesting. So Cole County, Missouri, back in this is 2004. They may still be there, but back in 2004, they had a sheriff named Greg White. And this is what Greg White said. It said, the sheriff of Cole County, Missouri, Greg White, advocating for campus carry, said, quote, in actual shootings, citizens do far better than law enforcement on hit potential. They hit their targets and they don't hit other people. I wish I could say the same for cops. We train more, they do better, end quote. That was a sheriff. There was a law enforcement professional who was saying, hey, you know what? Normal people need to, everyday people, not just law enforcement or military, they need to carry guns. They need to be able to carry it on campus. They need to be able to carry it everywhere where we need to protect people. And I thought that was an outstanding thing for say. I don't know. I mean, I honestly, at this point, I think I'm very comfortable saying that the civilians I know who are gun owners and carry are better shots than the cops I know. And he said that they practice more, but civilians I don't think civilians practice more. I think cops go to the range once a year as a part of their job, and that's that. They're exceptions.
I think you have two very. I think if you, my experience, and this is just my experience.
Yeah.
I think you have two very complete opposite ends. You have officers that are gun people. They understand the importance of it. They respect it. They want to be good at it. They put the time on their own to practice. And then you have others that carry it because they're required to, and they really don't care for it, and they do the bare minimum. I think you have two very opposite polar extremes, and I think. I don't know what the
in both groups.
Correct. Yeah. I don't think there's not a whole other in between.
Here's what I would say. I would say that if you took a room and just randomly picked 100 cops and put them in that room, and the only criteria was they're a cop and they've been a cop for 5 years, okay? And you took another room and you put 100 CCW holders in that room, and they've had their CCW for 5 years, and you just picked 10 people from each room. I'd put my money on the CCW holder. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
That's fair.
So anyway, so there you go. What I say each and every week, and I really want to continue to say it, is get a gun, get training, get your permit, carry everywhere you possibly can. And I'm going to add something this week. Help us expand where you can and can't exercise your Second Amendment rights, and other gun organizations as well. So there you go. That is your gun truth of the week. Good, Rich. Thanks for adding that last boom. Okay, questions. One of the big questions I got this week was about, and we've talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to talk more about it. There's a special election going on in District 1 down south, County Board of Supervisors. And we didn't endorse anybody. There was nobody to endorse. This was a situation where I've said before, there was no lesser of two evils. There were just two evils. And I think evil is hyperbole. But they definitely, neither candidate, there wasn't a single candidate that ran who was even close to representing Second Amendment, our values in any way. Both candidates that are left after the primary have huge problems, enormous problems. So I wanted to take a minute and talk about what exactly do we look at when we endorse somebody? Because, again, we didn't endorse anybody this time around. It comes down to four different things. We have a board that actually, we vet and we endorse. We discuss first, and then we vote and endorse. And the four criteria are, number one, Second Amendment, obviously. Like, they have to be pro-Second Amendment in thought and deed. It's not just answers from a questionnaire. We actually look to see how have they voted, what have their public statements been, how, can they answer questions face to face? Are they a gun owner? How much experience do they have? Are they with us philosophically? Are they with us, as far as, how they live their life, or, where exactly are they? So Second Amendment, that's obviously the primary thing. But that's not the only thing. The next three things are viability, character, and effectiveness. And I want to go through those real quick. Viability means even if you're massively pro-Second Amendment, you know everything there is to know about guns, and you're a supporter of everything that is Second Amendment, if you're not able to win a race, if you're not doing the things it takes to be successful in a campaign, we can't support you. It doesn't make any sense for us to tell our members, hey, help this person win, when that person isn't doing the things that they need to do to win. So are they a viable candidate? Have they ever run for office before? Are they able to raise funds? Do they have volunteers that will help them? Is their plan viable? I remember one time I talked to a candidate and said, okay, how much do you think you're going to need to run? And he said, probably about $20,000. And I said, okay, the last person who ran and won, they needed $60,000 to win. So why do you only need $20,000? Well, because he pulled that number out of his ear.
I was going to say another part.
He pulled that number out of his ear. I said, okay, fine. I said, look, let's say someone waves a magic wand and gives you that $20,000. What are you going to spend it on? And he had no idea. So candidate viability is extremely important. Character. Now, I admit character is actually, it's a fairly low bar. Because I think you can find character flaws in any human being. It's kind of a human trait that we have the occasional character flaws. What we're looking for here is, let's say you're pro-Second Amendment, you're an extremely viable candidate, you're somebody who's maybe held office before, something like that, you've raised money, you have connections, you have volunteers, you have name ID, you have all the things you need to win. And again, you're pro-Second Amendment, but you've broken a law. You're under investigation, or you actually have a criminal history, or, there's some kind of extremely concerning thing that you've done. Maybe you were convicted for it. Maybe you weren't. Maybe you were caught on camera, or maybe you were whatever. Character flaws are important. We can't just turn a blind eye and say, hey, this guy's pro-Second Amendment. We don't care if he, kicks puppies and, whatever. I mean, it's if they've broken the law or done something pretty extreme when it comes to being unethical, or we won't support them. We just can't. It just doesn't look good. You end up not being able to trust somebody if they've done something so extreme, and then it reflects poorly on us. Like, hey, we say we value or we have these values and principles, but then we back somebody who's done something horrific. So character issues. You might get disqualified if there are character issues, but admittedly, pretty low bar when it comes to character issues. And then effectiveness. Even if you pass all the other three and you get into office and you can't get anything done, then forget it. What's the point? We need you to stand up for us when it's time to stand up for us. We don't need you to build your entire career around the Second Amendment. If you're a city council member, pave the roads, make sure the trash is taken out, and, water's delivered and whatever, balance the budget and keep whatever. So, but if you can't get anything done, and you're telling us like, hey, I'm pro-Second Amendment. All right, well, if you get into office, you're not helping us in any way. And I'll tell you where that really comes into effect. Mostly it's incumbents. Hey man, we've endorsed you twice now. We got you elected, we got you reelected, now you're going for another reelection. You haven't done anything for us. We've even asked you to do a couple of things for us. You haven't done anything for us. Then forget it. We don't do that. So a lot of people on the Republican side are supporting John McCain. He is the Republican in the race. And there's kind of this thought like, well, hey, he's the Republican. Aren't you supporting the Republican? No, he's anti-gun. Full stop. He voted for a gun ban. He voted for a magazine ban while he was on the city council. He voted for the expansion of unconstitutional gun violence restraining orders. There is absolutely no way that we would support him. But I recently he put out a tweet, and he was bragging about the fact that that Chula Vista's budget increased by $30 million. $30 million. He was actually bragging about what a great thing it is. I'm proud to announce that our city's budget for the upcoming fiscal year, starting this July, has increased by $30 million. He's proud to announce that. Well, many cities are cutting back. We're investing in what matters most, blah, 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 blah. And he goes on and on and on. And I criticized him for that. Not because we're a tax organization, okay? I think people missed that point. We're criticizing him because he's going against his own stuff, his own criteria. He's holding up a mirror, or we're holding up a mirror and saying, hey, you're Mr. Fiscal guy, that's what you're running your whole campaign on. But here you are saying you're proud to announce there was a $30 million increase. Like, what's going on here? And basically it reaffirms all the things we've said about him. He's not honest. He's everything that's wrong with politics. He's putting the spin on it. If he really truly had principles and a backbone, he would have said, look, I don't agree with this $30 million increase. But I worked with my colleagues and did the best I could. I think this is going to be a problem for the following reasons. But whatever, there's a lot of ways he could have handled this rather than completely laying down for his entire city council and going against everything he says he supports. This was pure political spin. And we don't need that in the Second Amendment community. If you say what you mean, and mean what you say. And let me show you. I think Rich, can you pull up his Facebook page? Let's pull up his, there it is. Okay, so this is him, John McCann for supervisor, right? Now, page down just a little bit. Let's look at his first post. Paloma Aguirre is just wrong for us. From new taxes to anti-police policies, refusing payroll, blah, 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 blah. Okay, new taxes. By the way, Paloma is anti-gun as well, and she's running. We don't recommend you vote for either of them. And then page down a little bit more. And then, boom, Paloma Aguirre equals higher taxes. Okay, so you look at these messages. These aren't the messages. Number one, he's some of these, like this sewage thing, he's trying to take her strength away from her. He hasn't really done anything at all when it comes to the sewage in the Tijuana Valley. She is the mayor of Imperial Beach, and they've actually done some things when it comes to trying to clean up the Tijuana River Valley. So he's trying to take that away from her. He's trying to make it look like she hasn't done anything, and that he has, which he hasn't. There's not one thing the mayor of Chula Vista has done to clean up the Tijuana River problem.
He's not even touting anything on his own, if anything positive that he's done. He's just...
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing is there's a lot of talk about raising taxes.
Right.
There's not a lot of talk about anything else. They don't talk about the fact that he supports. The point is they agree on many of this. There's very little difference between their positions when it comes to social issues like illegal immigration, LGBT, that sort of thing. But he's trying to focus on taxes. Meanwhile, he's really proud that Chula Vista has raised their budget by $30 million. And, I pointed out that $30 million, that is twice as much as the entire city of Santee spends on their law enforcement. That's how much $30 million is. Adding now Chula Vista is a much bigger city, but $30 million is an enormous amount of money for a city budget. An enormous amount of money. They could have taken $30 million and they could have expanded their law enforcement so that it was 3 times the size or twice as big as, or 2 times the size of Santee's entire police force. And then the other thing we talked about last time on the show is the fact that he actually championed a tax raise, a tax increase last year. It's not like it's ancient history. As the mayor, he actually increased taxes. Again, this isn't about taxes. This is about character. This is about, who he is. Like, we're holding a mirror up to this guy and saying, hey, if you're going to tell people one thing and then do another on taxes, on all these other issues, if you're not going to chime in on important issues, if you're going to, conduct yourself in such a way, and, oh, by the way, you voted for a gun ban, we're out. Don't vote for anybody. Nobody in this race is worth it. So.
It's about integrity.
It's about integrity.
Yep.
So anyway, all right, that's your Q&A. Why don't we go to tell us about the Pew Pew Crew?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So we had a Pew Pew Crew's drawing. Yeah. We want to welcome new Pew Pew Crew members, Shake a Bear and Karen Lachner. I hope I didn't butcher that too badly. As well as Jiggy Jeff and Chris C.
Jiggy Jeff and Chris C. Well, yep. Awesome. Welcome, Pew Pew Crew members.
Yep. So if you're not yet a part of our Pew Pew Crew, you should be. Now is the time to join. Not only do you get exclusive perks like behind-the-scenes content and member-only updates, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be drawing a winner for something that you don't want to miss, a free CCW class with the gun guy himself. Right, that's a great value right there. That's right, you can get your concealed carry weapons class covered just by being a member of the Pew Pew Crew. It's that easy. So what are you waiting for? Become a member today, and you might be the lucky one heading to class with the gunsmith guy. Head over to our YouTube page and hit that join button to enter. Good luck and stay safe.
Awesome. Let's do some. We got a really cool legal update. Let's do that.
I didn't know we had new music.
We have new music. Did we not mention that?
No.
All right. Well, there you go. We got a whole new intro. Do the intro one more time. The drama. Legal updates brought to you by Gun Owners Radio.
All right. So this segment is our legal and legislative segment where we tell you what you need to know from the courts and from the legislators. Remember that we are not lawyers and nothing that we say is to be taken as legal advice. Our sponsor, John Dillon, is a lawyer, and he has been helping people to fight those GVROs. If you're not aware, those are those gun violence restraining orders, plus more. If you or somebody you know has had their self-defense rights taken away without due process, give John a call. Don't wait. His website is dillonlawgp.com, and his phone number is 760-642-7150.
All right, so what's going on with the Hearing Protection Act? We want to give you an update. Now, I got to tell you, first off, I can't believe we're even here. I can't believe we're talking about suppressors and legalizing suppressors. I remember talking 15 years ago about like, hey, what if we position this thing like it's, a hearing protection, like it's a health matter? And everybody said, yeah, that was probably a good idea. But nobody actually thought, I can't believe we're here. That's how much progress there's been in Second Amendment. So I wanted to give an update. And, but, a lot of people are doing like these daily or sometimes, twice a day updates, and they're doing a fantastic job. And, we do a show once a week for 2 hours. And, so I wanted to give a little bit more, some broader information. So when you hear this, the update may have already changed because things are changing daily and sometimes a couple times a day. There are guys, Guns and Gadgets, they're doing a great job of, giving like up to date, like, hey, it passed this committee, it passed this next committee, whatever. Now, we did do some of that because we needed you to make some phone calls. And at the end of this, we're going to need you to do that as well. But I wanted to give you a little bit broader background on this that isn't as time sensitive. So what is the HPA, the Hearing Protection Act? It was actually introduced this year. The HPA was introduced in the 119th Congress, which is the current Congress, is H.R. 404 in the House by Representative Ben Cline. Now, he's out of Virginia. He's a Republican out of Virginia. And he introduced that on January 15th, 2025. It had 38 co-sponsors, which is amazing. And then there's also Senate Bill 364. That's in the Senate. And Senator Mike Crapo. I think that's how you pronounce that.
It's a dangerous name.
C-R-A-P-O. And he's out of Idaho. And he introduced that as well with 28 co-sponsors. Not unusual to have a similar or the exact same bill in both the Senate and the House. As you know, we have a bicameral system of government going back to sixth grade, which means we have two different houses. And the exact same bill has to pass both houses before it goes to the executive branch. So a lot of times they work on it at the same time. And once they get a bill that matches word for word, and everybody signs off on it on the in the House, then it goes to the Senate and back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what's the progress? Well, on May 22nd, which was just a few days ago, the House passed HR1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which included Section 2 of the HPA, which removed suppressors from the NFA. This is a very significant step forward in legislation. So they're talking more about this, and there's been some debate. Some people say, well, let's tinker with it, and some people are saying, no, let's completely get rid of this thing. There's no reason a suppressor, this piece of healthcare, that's saving people's hearing, there's no reason this should be so heavily regulated.
I think a big part of the problem here is that there's a lot of misconceptions about what a suppressor even is.
Yeah.
I think if all you've seen is a movie and you've never actually been exposed to a suppressor, you have a really skewed view as to what it is. And I think that
we're actually, you know what? We're actually going to talk about that. We're going to go over some common myths actually at the in
there's
the
a lot.
roundtable. The bill hasn't been passed by the Senate, so it's made it through the House. It was in a committee in the House, and then it passed the House, and now it's on its way to the Senate. Now, I looked this up. It actually, unfortunately, is thought of currently as having a low probability of actually passing. There's an organization called GovTrack, Govtrack, and it's giving it a 2% chance of actually passing through and eventually being enacted, based on historical bill success. That, these guys are just placing bets, right? This isn't for sure, but they're basically saying, we don't know if this thing has the juice to get through the Senate. And I wanted to talk about reconciliation efforts, okay? There have been a lot of efforts to include the HPA in a reconciliation bill, which could actually bypass some of the normal process and procedure and legislative hurdles that would normally have to happen in the Senate. Now, what do I mean by that? What is reconciliation? Well, it's actually kind of interesting. This whole thing is just a tax. So they've basically said, hey, you have to pay this tax, which was basically a bunch of hoops to jump through in order to get this suppressor. So if they use a reconciliation method or procedure, then they might be able to get past all the normal process and procedure, and basically they would they'd have fewer votes. They'd only need a simple majority. So let's talk about what is reconciliation. You probably hear this a lot. If you haven't heard it a lot in the past, you're going to start hearing it a lot in the future. And this is important information, not just for the Hearing Protection Act, but going forward. So in the U.S. congressional process, reconciliation is actually a legislative procedure that's used to expedite the passage of certain budget-related bills. It was created under the Congressional Budget Act in 1974 to help Congress align spending and revenue with a budget resolution. So more concisely, the Reconciliation Act, it allows Congress to fast-track bills that affect the federal budget, such as taxes. And that's what this is. The Suppressor Act, the HPA, what they're trying to do is get rid of a tax. We talked about last week how this is you have to get a stamp, you have to pay a tax, and that's all this is. So you can fast track bills that affect the federal budget, such as taxes, spending, debt limit, and that'll help you bypass some of the procedural hurdles. So what GovTrack is saying is that if this thing tries to get the amount of votes it needs through a normal process and procedure, they don't think the votes are there. Okay, the 60 votes that would normally be needed, they don't think the votes are there. But in reconciliation, because this is a budget issue, the votes might actually be there. Reconciliation bills must directly impact federal revenue, spending, or the debt ceiling. If it's not related to the budget, then a senator can actually remove this. So if they say, hey, we're going to run this through the reconciliation and it's not really related to the budget, one senator can actually remove that. And that's actually called the Byrd Rule, B-Y-R-D, named after Senator Byrd, who was a racist Democrat out of the South. But he's long gone. He passed away a few years ago, as a matter of fact. He served for like 100 years. This guy was in the Senate for 1,000,000 years. It was ridiculous. I think, right after they signed the Constitution, Byrd got into office. But he was a racist senator out of the South. He was actually a KKK member and continued to be in the Senate up until I think he just died like 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. Okay, so if they, in the Senate, reconciliation bills require a simple majority, so 51 votes, and to pass, which would avoid the normal 60 votes and a filibuster. It makes it a really powerful tool for passing controversial things like the HPA. So the HPA, which seeks to remove suppressors from the NFA, the National Firearms Act, which is a tax-related law, it could potentially be included in a reconciliation bill because it involves changing tax provisions. It's a $200 tax stamp. A literal stamp is what you get for your $200. However, any non-fiscal provisions could be struck down by the Byrd Rule unless they're very, very carefully crafted. So they might, if they try to alter the definition of what a suppressor is or something like that. But that's what's going on. So if it most likely doesn't have the votes to make it through the Senate in the normal traditional way, in a full bill. But if they say, hey, you know what, this is actually a budget thing, it's a $200 tax that we're trying to get rid of or whatever, and that directly affects the budget, then they could send it through reconciliation, which means they'd only need 51 votes. And they damn well better have 51 votes in the Senate to pass this thing. I mean, they certainly make a lot of noise that they have at least 51 votes to protect our Second Amendment rights. But, I guess this is going to be a big test. So here's what we need you to do. We need you to make some noise. We need you to call John Thune, Thune. He's actually the Senate Majority Leader. At his office in Washington, D.C., John Thune. 202-224-2321 and say, hey, it's real simple. Pass the Hearing Protection Act. Pass the Hearing Protection Act. Hi, my name is such and such. I'm calling Senator Thune to let him know I want him to pass the Hearing Protection Act. Call today, call tomorrow, call the next day, tell your friends to call. We want to flood their phones with requests to get this done. If anyone can get this done, it's the chair of the Senate, John Thune. And he, by the way, is generally pro-Second Amendment. At least he makes a lot of noise that he is. So calling 202-224-2321. 202-224-2321. Look at that. It's up on the screen.
Look at that.
Call him, say, hey, I want the Hearing Protection Act passed. So there's some information on the Hearing Protection Act. It's not an up to the second update on exactly where it is. But what it is, it's a call to action. It's an education on exactly what's going on. And more importantly, now you have a little information in your back pocket about what exactly reconciliation is and means. And now that you've heard it, you're going to hear it 100 times over the next few years. So there you go. That's your legal and legislative update.
Those are the bills and the lawsuits. So now you know. But what can you do about it? Let's do our deployment segment and find out.
Let's do it. Okay, deployment, where we need you and where you need to be. This segment's brought to you by SageTree. SageTree, for all your website needs, for all your digital marketing needs, we use them a lot. Gun Owners Radio uses them. San Diego County Gun Owners uses them. Inland Empire Gun Owners uses them. Orange County Gun Owners uses them. They do a fantastic job. Go to sagetree.com. And, if you need a new website, if you want to reach out to the gun community, if you want to reach out to the digital community and figure out a more efficient way for you to do marketing, get a hold of SageTree and they'll give you a free consultation and figure out how they can help your business. Support them because they support you and your Second Amendment. Okay, so this is all about getting involved. We need you to get involved. Knowing about bills, knowing what's going on in the Second Amendment world is great. But now we need you to actually pull the trigger, so to speak, and get involved. So we got a couple things to talk about. We talked a lot about the 2025 Gun Rights Policy Conference, thanks to Second Amendment Foundation. Fantastic organization. Go to saf.org/GRPC. It's in Salt Lake City in September this year, September 26th through the 28th. And it's right in downtown Salt Lake City. It's free. You got to get there and you got to find a place to stay, but going to the actual conference is free. I particularly like this conference because you hear from attorneys, you hear from activists, you hear from influencers, and it's really a lot of really good information that you can use, and it's a lot of really great networking. Plus, Salt Lake City, I got to tell you, is actually kind of a cool city. We're going to go check out the Browning Museum, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have a real good time meeting people and getting some good information. So this is really the only conference I go to. I think it's extremely valuable. So check it out. I think it's a good opportunity. I think you need to start making plans right about now. September is really kind of right around the corner. So, okay, the next thing, I want to show you our website. If you're thinking, hey, how do I get involved? I want to talk about some specific things that are coming up. Now, this weekend, obviously, it's Memorial Day. There wasn't a lot going on this weekend, but let's show you exactly what our website can offer you. If you go to sdcgo.org, sdcgo.org, and click on volunteer or just add /volunteer to the website, we'll show you our website. So let's page down. Volunteering is super easy. All you do is, let's say, for example, stop right there. Okay, so say, hey, I got some room on my calendar on June 7th. Well, great. We actually have two things going on June 7th. We have a tabletop at the Gun Range San Diego, which is on Balboa. And then up in North County, we have a tabletop at North County Shooting Center. It's 10 to 4. There's actually two shifts. It's like a 10 to 2 and a 2 to 4 or something like that, or a 10 to 1 and a 1 to 4. I forget. But if you click on that and sign up, say, hey, here's my name and my email address, boom, you're set to go. And all you have to do is show up. They'll make sure you have a T-shirt, there's going to be somebody there helping you. All the table and everything is going to be already set up. Actually, in fact, show them that picture that we just did. Go back one and then show them the picture. So, see the picture of see those guys? All those, look at how beautiful guys right there. I love those two. Those guys are the best. So all that table will already be set up for you. All that material will already be there. And somebody who is very knowledgeable on tabletops will be there to assist you. They'll hand you a T-shirt and say, hey, they'll walk you through. Here's some of the literature. Here's some of the things we do. And all you do is talk to gun owners. As they're walking by, coming to the range or whatever, just say, hey, have you ever heard of San Diego County gun owners? If they want information on CCW, you got a pamphlet for that. If they want information on the organization, we got a pamphlet for that. And that's all it is. It's not that hard. And if you don't know the answer to a question, either the trained volunteer who set up the table will help you, or you just tell them, gee, I don't know, but if you give us your email address, we'll get the answer for that. Super easy. So back out of there. And there's a couple. So there's shooting socials and tabletops. Most of those tabletops are at gun shops, and you don't have to click on it. But on June 21st, there's even Vietnam Vets Legacy Vets Motorcycle Run tabletop, which is very cool. I'm sure that's John Becker who's running that. But say you want to help with a shooting social. Let's click on the June 11th shooting social. So if you click on a shooting social, if you say, hey, I do want to give somebody a first-time shooting experience, then again, you'll get a cool T-shirt, which is awesome. You sign up, you give them your name and your email address. Nice. Very high-tech graphics there. I like the... if you sign up and give them your name and email address and show up, all you do is you bring your 9mm pistol, you bring your eye and ear protection, we provide the rest. We have people that have signed up and paid. We will provide the ammo, the range. We'll even give them a safety briefing. We'll give them eye and ear protection. All we need you to do is, come out. And if it's your first time, if you think to yourself, you know what, I've helped people shoot before, but I really want to make sure that I am comfortable first, and I see exactly what's going on. Great. Sign up. Let them know, hey, it's my first time. I just want to observe. And boom, you can observe. So that is our volunteer page here down in San Diego County Gun Owners. Very, very active group. We just need your help. So there you go. All right. That is our deployment section. Okay, so our guest today is really interesting. He's somebody that whose career has been absolutely fantastic, and his advocacy has been impeccable when it comes to Second Amendment. And I don't think enough people know who he is, and I'd like to change that a little bit today. Back in the 90s, things started getting really bad when it came to gun laws in California. And by the 2000s, it was horrible. We already had the roster, and the assault weapons ban had been expanded, and magazine bans, and many of the horrible things that we hate today about California gun laws had kicked into full force. And a lot of people complained, and a very few people actually did something about it. And our next guest is somebody who did something about it. And I wanted to talk to him and have him tell his story and talk about some of his amazing accomplishments. Our guest is Gene Hoffman, the founder of CGF, California Gun Rights Foundation. The R is silent. How you doing, Gene?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you, Michael.
Yeah, man. Thanks for making the time. I really, truly, I remember way back in the day on the message boards, you and a few folks were leaders, true leaders when it comes to Second Amendment. Like I said in the intro, there were a lot of bad things happening, and a lot of people had a lot of ideas and a lot of complaints. But I think, honestly, you guys were the ones that really stepped up and actually did something. Talk about that.
Well, so, I definitely came to California in about 95, 96, and moving from North Carolina, you're talking about culture shock. Now, I was so busy running emusic.com and helping launch the iPod and the iTunes Music Store later that when everything was really coming together in 2000, it was like, crap, I need to buy an AR, I need to get some magazines, I'm too darn busy, crap. But then, fast forward to about 2007, and a good friend of mine and a co-founder of one of my companies walked in. He's like, you know how we thought AR-15s were illegal in California? I don't think they are. And this was, again, the very early days of the off-list lowers, or OLL days. And so this piques my interest. I'm like, it's got to be wrong. And there's an important little side note. I'm one of the guys who ended export controls on cryptography in the United States. I was at PGP Inc., and it was kind of my idea, and then later my co-founder at eMusic helped me with this, to print the PGP source code in a book and then export it, and basically got investigated by the Department of Commerce as being a nuclear arms exporter, which is kind of a fun little background story.
Wow.
But 90 days later, the entire law has changed and is now a $15 form to export strong crypto anywhere in the world. So when I took a look at what was going on with OLLs, it was like, this sounds familiar. And wait, they're absolutely right. The current California laws do not say what they think it says, especially in light of a couple court cases at the time that a friend of mine, Don Kilmer, because I had contacted each other in the 2000s, even before, had litigated with, I think, Chuck Michel and others. And so when we looked at that, I was like, wait, there is a huge opportunity here. People can own real AR-15s and still comply with the law. And, that kind of went through a couple steps until one day I had one of those shower moments. I was sitting there thinking about the definition of detachable for detachable magazines. And it was like, wait, that doesn't say what California and the courts thinks it says. In fact, I think we could design a magazine release for AR-15s that would be releasable only with a bullet, but not with a finger. And that would make it completely compliant with the law. And that was what became the bullet button. I had named it the Range Safe Mag Lock, but the design that has been the dominant design was mine. And I intentionally kind of made that available for free to everybody because I wanted that to be an inexpensive part that people just added and had functional and safe ARs. And actually it came out of, I went to the range with an AR with a actual Prince 50 locked kit, and I jammed and I was stuck because it was a brand new build. And this is just not a nice place to be. But that moment, when I stepped out of the shower going, I think we can do this. And then, built the CAD versions of it. I've still got 5 or 6 of those that originally printed up here. And, it set off a revolution. I mean, I think we thought something like 10 to 15 million AR-15s came into California. We were able to, because this also was about the same time that this little case called, what becomes DC versus Heller was moving through the court systems, and it caught my eye. And in fact, Alan Gurr and I became close friends. I have this weird record at eMusic of being the youngest CEO of a national market public company ever. And, Alan was this young, unheard of, but amazing lawyer and writer. And so ended up getting to do some kind of, team up there to think about, how to handle the Supreme Court arguments and all those sort of steps. And so all this was coming to head all at the same time. And, so we were able to really make it clear that off-list lowers were completely legal. We actually made the Department of Justice give them up and hand them back. So that was your proof point if anybody was worried about it back in the day. And then there were some grumblings about the bullet button, but I mean, one of my proudest moments was that the bullet button was named as a item to be banned by Dianne Feinstein in one of her many Senate bills. And it's like, okay, we've made it when that happens.
You've arrived. When it's when your item's actually been named by Feinstein, you arrived. And I'll tell you, just to pause for a second and talk about the assault weapons ban, quote unquote. You always got to do air quotes when you say assault weapons ban, otherwise you get a bunch of comments saying, yeah, it's not a real term. But I want to make clear, I want to make sure that everybody really understands that the intention of that was to ban everything that looks like an AR or an AK. You weren't supposed to be able to comply with that law. So I think a lot of people think, well, gee, why did they make a law requiring a bullet button or now requiring, a different compliant part? That's not what they did. They were truly trying to end your ability to own that pattern, that style of semi-automatic rifle. It was just, Gene, what you're explaining, that made it possible for people to even own those again. There was a few years there where you walked into a gun shop, nothing looked like an AR or an AK. It was done. It was gone. They did not want you to own that. I really want to emphasize and make sure that people understand that.
Yeah, well, we went back to ranges full of people shooting ARs and AKs, and that was a huge change. And it took a little while because people, you hit on something I think that's important. We were able to find this group of people who were leaders and senior folks in their various industries, be that Hollywood prop folks, software developers, hardware engineers, and we take a very different look at how all this works. And, when we brought this kind of advanced regulatory and legal view to it, we could combine all of those things together. And that's very much what the, CGF actually was that kind of unique melding of skills that really allowed us to push back and drive, frankly, 18 wheelers through the AW ban. I joked to Jason Davis the other day on X that, how many 18 wheelers did I drive through that law exactly? But, and I know, as a Californian, you'll understand what I say. I think people in the rest of the states that are freer will be like, what are you telling me? But I consider it a win that we got people the opportunity to register another, 10, 15 million guns, even though people didn't. I mean, I have off-list lowers that are now fully registered. And ultimately, I think that's still unconstitutional will end. But it's darn nice to know that I actually have a fully functioning AR-15 and I don't even have to kind of joke about it.
I agree. It really, truly, I mean, like I said, had nothing been done, had people just refused to, figure out a way to comply, whether you call it a loophole or a workaround or whatever, reality, you figured out a way to comply. Had that not happened, it would be a very different California. There'd be a very different gun industry. There'd be a very different look to gun owners. And I think it was extremely important.
Well, there's an important point hiding here. I just kind of want to bump in. In most industries with governments, the industry ends up basically bear hugging and being in control of their regulator. And for whatever reason, we gun owners until CGF kind of didn't take that to heart. I mean, if you go to the FDIC or the Fed, the banks control them. Like the banks tell them what to do and they make sure that they can't get out of line. And gun owners didn't do that. And I think that was the big change, was to say, you know what? The Department of Justice Division of or Bureau of or whatever firearms, they're going to do what we tell them to do. We're the experts here. We know this better than they do. They are not gun people. Very few of them are. So that was the kind of fundamental change. It was like, if you're going to do this, we're going to hold you to account.
The gun community, gun industry, gun owners are different from a lot of other industries in a lot of ways. And I think that we could learn a lot from other industries in the way they cooperate and operate. Why do you think what you just described, why do you think that is? What is it about gun owners in the gun industry that why didn't we do what everyone else is doing?
Well, so I'll say it this way, gun 1.0, gun culture 1.0, it was conservatives. And so we were asking conservatives to do conservatives for change. And that's not easy. Now, what I love about it is we've done that. I mean, I think Freedom Week around magazines is just the best illustration because, it was back in the day when some of these things happened that the entire nationwide gun industry could have taken advantage of in California. People were too scared. But finally, everybody started to realize, no, wait, a district court means that I can't get in trouble for doing this. And in fact, I can open my doors to Californians and do something good for the entire gun industry. So, we've changed. I mean, I think the great thing is that CGF in a very large sense has changed through, the outgrowth of both FPC and, SAF. We've been able to educate the rest of the states that this is a much better strategy. You get much better results, and we don't have to be that conservative about how we defend our rights.
So you touched on it a little bit, but what was talk a little bit about the catalyst or the aha moment when you kind of talked about it a little bit, but what actually made you start CGF? Like what did that look like? What was that conversation and meeting?
So I think it was really two big things that were happening. There was a kind of core group of folks on calguns.net. And, for people who aren't in California, we all go there so we don't get abused by AR-15 guys going, why do you live in California? Anyway. And it was very clear that we had built a bit of a brain trust. And then getting the off-list lowers that had been seized back from the Milpitas lowers incident was really, that kind of crystallizing moment. And it was happening at the same time that we were building what became the assault weapons guide, the, one-pager that ended up being everybody, including law enforcement, used to decide whether your gun was legal or not. And when it was that clear, it was like, wait, we have cash, we have talent. We should make it so that tax-deductible donations are part of this. We should celebrate the coming deluge of litigation because, we're looking at DC versus Heller and expecting to win. And so from that perspective, all those kind of three things meant it was time. And at the time, a lot of the gun rights organizations, especially in California, just weren't aggressive. They did not necessarily know how to use federal courts. They didn't know the kind of, again, these tools that you can use to make government bend to your will. And I mean, the good news is sooner or later when you explain that to gun owners, it starts to resonate because like part of the reason we own guns is to make sure that the government stays in its box. And wait, what if we tighten that box? And in fact, we can. So I think that was the big transition and the change to really do that. And, out of CGF and our battles and wins, I mean, we kept off-list lowers and bullet buttons legal for more than a decade. Which certainly they did not want to have happen, but it was a hard problem for the anti-gunners. It was like, do we want to make more AR-15s legal in California and admit all this is true, or do we just want to try to ignore it? And then, Leland Yee went on KCBS and tried to go out on a interesting jihad at the same time he was dealing automatic weapons to the Philippines. So, it was a fun time. But I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is that it was clear that there was a change and we needed new blood to drive that. Now, what's happened is, we've built new institutions across the U.S. We've modernized those institutions. Folks like the CRPA now do an excellent job in federal court in a way that they had never done before. And so, I think that was a huge piece of the emphasis. It was, hey, look, let's bring some of these techniques and skills up to and including like, better propaganda. I mean, one of the board members of CGF is Josh Berger, and he's kind of our Alinsky. We've pulled off some crazy stuff that really was the exact right kind of politics and events. We once had a meeting of anti-gun lawyers, very afraid that we were going to protest them, and so like they ended up with like 50 cops, and we sent one person and recorded it, and it was hilarious. So it's that kind of set of techniques that people just hadn't really thought about using to protect gun rights.
So after you started CGF, when did you know, what victory or what thing happened that you thought, okay, this was a good idea. I'm glad we did this.
Well, I think it was McDonald. We were heavily involved in McDonald. We were an amicus in McDonald, and that was the step necessary to really start attacking the state. Without McDonald, in fact, Don Kilmer had actually incorporated the 14th Amendment via the 14th Amendment right before McDonald, though, of course, the Ninth Circuit then messed with that as usual. But, I think it became very clear that we had the tools, we had the talent, we had the money to go attack. Now, I think we hoped that the Supreme Court would have moved a little faster because there were things coming out of California. And look, one of my favorite cases is actually Sylvester versus, I guess, Bonta is what it ended up being. But it drew a dissent from Justice Thomas, who's like, you're telling me that people who are carrying guns in a gun store concealed on their belt need to wait 10 days because they might be mad now? That was one of my favorite ones because it just really showed you how amazingly stupid the Ninth Circuit was. And, just purely ideological. It was like, screw the law. We don't like guns. Next.
And, now, why do you, of course, McDonald and Heller were hand in hand. Heller, affirmed that, of course, it's an individual right, put forward a test. And then McDonald said, yeah, it's not just for the federal government, but the state governments have to incorporate it, as well. So why do you think there was a need for Bruen after Heller and McDonald?
Oh, well, it was the courts were intransigent. Basically, you had a bunch of, what I would call very old, very federal folks who felt like, well, I'm protected by guns, so you don't need them. And that's exactly the reverse of what the entire spirit of the Second Amendment is. Jay Harvey, I always forget who he is, and I think in the Fourth Circuit was like, how dare we let somebody get killed because we let people own guns? And it's like, how dare you get someone killed because they didn't own guns? That's the problem with this conversation is this balancing took effect in 1792, and that rule is the rule of law. Now, a lot of judges would prefer to put themselves in front of that, and the answer is that it's going to take the Supreme Court to continue to beat them up. And I mean, I'll be blunt. Bruen is a much stronger ruling than if you would have asked a lot of people before Bruen that the Supreme Court would ever have issued. And the reason they did that is because they can see the lower courts being intransigent. So, and no, it's frustrating that we don't get there as fast as we'd all like. But I think the intransigence will end up making a wider Second Amendment set of jurisprudence than we would have gotten had, like, we even batted 500 in the Ninth Circuit instead of having 100% of our victories overturned.
That's interesting. Where do you think, I've told people that I see I see the future of the Second Amendment. I can see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I know now it's not a train, headed my way. It feels like for the first time since I've been paying attention and involved in, activism and it feels like we have the upper hand, even more so than after Heller. It feels like, okay, now it's just a matter of time. How do you feel about, let's say, the medium term, the next 5 years, and how do you feel about the next 30 years when it comes to Second Amendment?
Well, look, the right answer to really secure the Second Amendment is to secure it at all levels. So I mean that in the sense of like what's happening potentially with removing suppressors from the NFA in the next few weeks. At the legislative level, we're talking about reciprocity for carry licensing. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. And look, getting more people able to carry, it becomes a right people care about. When you have women of color and women in general realizing they really can carry a firearm for their own protection, it starts to cross party lines and become a thing that people are like, no, this is just part of being an American. And the more we get it at the grassroots level, take people shooting. People love shooting. Get your state house where you can to protect it, and where we need to, use the federal government against the few blue state holdouts that have gone so bad here. But I think you're absolutely right. Look, the light at the end of the tunnel of winning the war is there. Every battle is still going to be hard. Like, we're not going to win every battle to get there. But I think ultimately that we're going to win the battles that get us to a much broader place. And so, I'll give you a great example of this. It is now very clear that 18 to 20-year-olds are going to be able to buy and carry handguns. After Heller, before Bruin, let's say it that way, it wasn't clear that we were going to get that. I mean, we lost that in the Fifth Circuit, right? So, this gets to my point of, I think the good news is at the end of the day when the war is won, and it won't be fully won. Someone will always be messing with this, just like, they mess with every other right. But we'll be at a place where everybody can own a real modern rifle, can own a real handgun, carry it everywhere that it's appropriate, AKA, you can't carry into an army base. You probably can't carry into prison. You may have to check your gun at the court. But after that, you can pretty much go everywhere with your firearm because, bad guys don't care. So, look, I think the key thing to know is that we can win bigger, and we just need to continue to be pragmatic about taking our victories and then adding to them. I see a lot of people be like, hey, zero tax on a suppressor wasn't enough. And I agree it'd be better to be better. But if we're going to be completely crazy about it, well, it's not a good enough bill if it doesn't preempt California law.
Yeah, I agree with that. And how long is it going to take, Gene?
So, I think again that,
Oh, you're supposed to say 2 weeks.
Oh, what, 2 weeks? Jesus, it's
2
been a
weeks.
while since I've had to say
weeks.
that. But yeah, no.
But go ahead. Then I want you to tell the 2 week story, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, I think that the good news is that as the federal government starts to enforce the Second Amendment, and people don't know this, but historically, the Department of Justice was literally founded to enforce things like the Second Amendment against, frankly, the black codes and all of the bull crap in the former Civil War states.
Yeah.
So that is a sea change, and seeing that sea change, I think we're going to be able to pick off some of the most troubling things with legislation. But I think the core rights are still going to be decided by the courts. And I think, watching Texas try to claim that sensitive places, might be unconstitutional, but please don't hold me against that. That's exactly right? When we're going to win in Texas and lose in California, potentially, that gets it to the Supreme Court. That gets the Supreme Court to opine and go, look, the list of sensitive places is really narrow and pretty obvious, and these aren't them.
Well, and it feels that your point about the DOJ, it feels like no matter where, I'm surprised that the Trump administration is going as hard as they are in our favor for the Second Amendment. But it feels like the DOJ is going back to that mission, at least how they're, at least some of their actions and what they're publishing, what they're saying. How do you feel about the most recent Trump DOJ?
Look, I'm excited about it. I think it's exactly the right answer. It is what the DOJ was originally created to do. It was to enforce, civil liberties in the states. It wasn't to trace criminals. It's a kind of changed thing that it did that. But, I think, the Trump family cares about this issue, and they realize it is a real issue, and it's something that they can, fix. I mean, it's one of those things where if you go legislatively correctly here, if you support the right cases, and by the way, having the U.S. Department of Justice support some of our cases now on our side fully is a big change. I mean, never forget that the Department of Justice in Heller was like, well, they're probably right, but scary machine guns, don't let them have them. And it was like, well, screw you for that one. Thanks, Mr. Bush. Here we're getting full-throated. These guys are utterly right, and you should overturn this law. District Court, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals. That's a new thing.
And it's amazing. So tell the story about 2 weeks. When I first got on Cal Guns, anytime anyone asked about a timeline, you had 15 people rattle off 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. And I never knew. It took me a while to figure out what the heck they're even talking about. So tell that story real quick.
So some of the guys that had gotten into the off-list lower world and were writing letters to the DOJ would receive their OLLs and talk about them on Calguns. And basically, this started a spread. And then Ignatius Chin, Iggy, was the kind of enforcement officer of the DOJ back in the day. And he was there when someone was picking up their off-list lowers and went, "You're going to jail in 2 weeks." And so it became this thing that everybody was like, "You all are going to jail for buying these off-list lowers in 2 weeks." And, that even, of course, when I was requiring the Department of Justice to return the Milpitas lowers, we were like, "You're going to jail in 2 weeks." And so it just became a thing that everything was going to happen in 2 weeks because nothing happened in 2 weeks.
Now, I think one of the biggest things that has helped, one of the biggest policy changes that has helped gun owners in general is just the ability to carry. Basically, shall issue CCWs, which I think started in the early 90s in Florida, and now it's amazing. I mean, we've seen San Diego County go from 1,100 CCWs to over 24 to over 25,000. I think we're at this point. They're issuing almost as many every month as there used to be issued total. That has been a huge change. It's normalized it. Like you said earlier, once you give somebody a right, it's really hard to take it away. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, we tried to warn a lot of the sheriffs even when we were earlier winning these CCW cases in Sacramento and, around Davis as well. We made Sacramento go shall issue. I mean, people forget that SAC has been shall issue for a very long time after a very long time of not being shall issue. And that was definitely a CGF situation. 1 to 3% of the population in these counties is going to carry and have a carry license. And when you start doing those numbers, you can see why everything's so backed up and why we're heading there. We're not there yet, mostly because I think a lot of people are slow just because they're like, man, it's a lot of work and renewal every 2 years. But the fact that the California legislature is seriously considering going from 2 years to 4 years of expiry because of the amount of pain we've put on all the sheriffs tells you something. And, ultimately, I think this is where folks like the DOJ are going to matter because they're going to be able to press on the cases that we're all bringing to go, look, every other state does it this way. You are violating federal constitutional law if you continue to do it. And if you want a federal, DOJ to enter a federal case and stop you, we will. We will change California law. That's where we're heading really quick.
I don't know if it's, it's probably hand in hand, but I don't know if culture has a bigger influence on policy or if policy has a bigger influence on culture. The CCW situation kind of seems to be a little bit of both, but I don't know if people really truly understand 2008, 2010 in the political world in California. Nobody cared about guns. No one talked about guns. No one ran, to help you get your gun rights back. Today, everyone's talking about guns. They may be on the wrong side, but everyone's talking about guns. There are a lot of people on the right side that are running and saying, "Hey, this is a priority for me." We've come a long way. The whole situation has come a long way.
Yeah, and I think there's two really big macro things that people lose sight of. The first one is that every time we have a major Supreme Court case that affirms the Second Amendment, we get 3 to 5% to the pro-gun side in the Pew annual Should We Ban Handgun survey. So we've literally gotten like a 15% swing since Heller in the direction of no, handguns should not be banned. That is just this huge thing, and it causes the flywheel of policy to drive social. And the other piece of this is that the younger you are, the less afraid of guns you are, even though, quote unquote, you shouldn't be. And that has everything to do with video games. People grew up with realistic firearms and video games, and it was cool and it was fun. And it was like, well, I'm an adult now. I want to own one of these. What the hell? And I think that has been one of the biggest mistakes. In fact, the older gun world did. They tried to vilify violent video games at one point. And certainly the anti-gunners know that, but then are stuck like telling kids they can't play games they like. Never be the scold who's telling your kids they can't use finger guns to play cops and robbers. Like, that's just sad.
Or did you remember the story about the kid who got suspended because he bit a Pop-Tart in the shape of a gun? And then, Pew Pew his buddy or whatever, and he got suspended from school for that. That level of ridiculousness, I think people are I think people are starting to see it's kind of slow. It took a few years for people to go, hey, you know what? I think we've, the pendulum's gone a little too far, but seems to be coming back the other direction.
Yeah, look, one of the things I do like too is, along with that, though, the other version on this pendulum swing is that people are like, look, AR-15s are boring and normal. It's taken a while to finally get there, but we're getting much closer to that, where people are just like, look, this is the modern rifle. Full stop.
Truly. So talk about CGF specifically. What do you want to see from CGF? Where does CGF fit, let's say within the next 5 years?
Yeah, so, now that we're getting the Supreme Court precedents we need to drive them down into the localities, I think that's the next step. So, there still are a lot of places where some of the counties, for historical reasons, ban carry in like wilderness parks where there are coyotes and rattlesnakes and mountain lions. Like, I'm sorry, but like that's a completely valid reason you'd want to carry a firearm. And so I think it's a lot of what I would call local cleanup. It is literally going around and addressing the remaining issues that California gun owners might face that are clearly unconstitutional, need to be not there. I don't want a California gun owner with a California concealed carry license to be walking through a park he doesn't know is supposedly banned, and even though it's unconstitutional, like, has to do the paperwork and maybe even go down and get fingerprinted. Like, that shouldn't happen. So it's really making sure that we're going after those quality of life items that are very California specific, as well as helping the rest of the national organizations set up certain national issues that they can kind of use California as the anvil and other cases as the hammer.
I got to tell you, that's the other thing I like a lot. Okay, so you're a founder and board member for CGF. You are a board member, correct me if I'm wrong, for SAF?
I am a board member of SAF, yeah.
Yeah, very tight with FPC. You've already mentioned, CRPA.
Yep.
I really like right now how all the groups are cooperating better than probably they ever have before.
Well, and even
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this is the generational change. I mean, I'm now kind of one of the oldsters, which is kind of wild to me. I was used to be the young buck that everybody was mad at. But what's happened is, my people or my people's people have now infiltrated almost all of these organizations. These are people that, Brandon and I saw early on as being movers and shakers. So even folks like Greenlee at NRA, you just have this entirely different group of folks who think like, this is a war we can win. Here are our tools. We've got the budget. Let's go. And I think that's been the major change. You've seen just this very different set of staff that has this, hey, we can win this view. Because, I mean, even in the national organizations, are like, there was real reticence to bring Heller all the way to the Supreme Court. They thought we would lose. And, I admit that, Al and I were kind of like, we need to know that. Like, if we're going to lose the Second Amendment with this court, like, we're going to have to do something very different, and we may be able to finally wake up all of the people who thought they were in free states like Virginia or Washington. Oops. But look, we were right. The answer was, when push came to shove, the Supreme Court of the United States was not going to take one of the amendments to the Bill of Rights out. And, downstream of that is now a group of people that are in all of these organizations who, look, we'll still squabble once in a while. It's a bunch of guys who, have decent egos. What do you want to know?
Right.
But we all are working for the same reason. We all feel each other are competent, and we can actually have real conversations behind the scenes about, how do you frame Snope? What is the right way to get 18 to 20 to the Supreme Court? And so I'm really excited about that. I kind of came of age in this world when it was very, very tribal. And that tribalism is down considerably, and I like it a lot.
It was tribal, and there was real distrust. It wasn't like a rivalry. It was almost like enemies. And
I got doxxed publicly by one of them.
Yeah. No, I hear it. I got a cease and desist letter from, I get it. We've all, you know what I mean? But man, it turned hard, and it turned on a dime. And I'm seeing, NRA and CRPA, everybody, GOA, GOC, all these groups are starting to come together and, march in the same direction, which is really great. I want to, you talked about Brandon, talk about the amazing job that FPC has done. I don't think it's a secret to say that NRA was distracted for a few years. And if there was one group that deserves to get a ton of credit for stepping up and filling a leadership vacuum, FPC has done an amazing job. And could you just talk a little bit about, just gush a little bit about FPC?
Yeah, and I first have to start with Brandon because, the situation was that, when we were building CGF and, looking at the people in the community, Brandon stood out as having a set of skills that are hard to find. He both had the kind of strategic view, but he also was a real operator. He could actually get things done, and he had the time to commit. And, I've been a serial entrepreneur, so I've always had a day job that is not exactly small. And so it was a real opportunity to put Brandon in a situation where at first it was in CGF as a full-time executive director, but then it became clear that California's focus needed national capabilities, and we shouldn't do those in the same organization. So Brandon was really able to use CGF as a springboard to go build FPC, make FPC a infrastructure provider to a lot of the state organizations that came of age around like CGF's time, but then really fill a vacuum that, the NRA didn't know how to do this and was distracted on top. There was a bit of a generational change there as well. So, I'm just really proud of, kind of, I hate to say it, but my mentee going full time and really changing the dynamics of how the entire, firearms advocacy works. Certainly he's a guy who will throw some elbows and he can be grumpy at times, but, success is pretty hard to deny.
Absolutely. And FPC deserves a ton of credit for stepping up and filling the gap in the front line. Brandon is the very tip of that spear. So absolutely. What is your why? Why is this important to you? Is it's clearly much more than just a hobby or just a way to, poke somebody in the eye. This seems to be a defining thing in your life. And why is it that important to you?
So for me, personal freedom really matters. For whatever reason, I've got a weird set of skills that allows me to be someone who can create more personal freedom for everybody. And I do mean everybody. So, my day job is fixing finance with blockchains that are actually secure and decentralized. So, that was always about putting the tools and the power of wealth and safety in everybody's individual hands. And, in this particular instance, I've always been worried about Civil War 2.0. And I think the number one way to make sure we do not have Civil War 2.0 is to make it extremely costly for all sides because it just would not work. And that was the original idea behind the Second Amendment. It was, look, you can bring your organized military all you want, but we've got more guns than any military, period. And that's the truth of today. The great part is success is never having to see whether we were right about that or not. And I love that part of it. But, it really is this bottom line of modern technology has made it so that the individual can have real power and real ability to protect and project their rights. And I have made it a life's mission to make sure that that was truly secure.
Why is that important to you? Why is it important that individuals have rights and freedom?
Without them, I think we descend into poverty. I mean, every time you see a group of people, a state, whatever, drop these kind of core personal civil liberties and democratic style items, but by the way, democracy equally scary and bad, you see people fall into mass starvation, horrible war. These are the wrong direction. The right direction is giving people the tools and the freedom to think differently, to not have to say yes to the simple majority. When I say democracy is bad, I always like to remind people that California recently voted to ban gay marriage. People forget about that little moment.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of the old joke of what did communists use for light before candles? Light bulbs.
Right.
So, great. What else do you want gun owners to know in California or across the nation?
Go out there, get your licenses, tell us when you're having problems that shouldn't be there. We're actually pretty good at fixing things, and we've in some ways been able to fix a lot of things and can't talk about them because it keeps us fixing things. But, it really is important to get that general investment. Even if you think you're not going to necessarily need to carry, get a license. You don't know who decides to go weird on you. You have a strange interaction and you don't want to wait 60 to 90 days to get that license. So, it's that. And it's also, look, take your friends who are on the fence or even anti to a gun range, let them shoot, let them feel empowered. Like once you demystify things and get that empowerment inside people, even the most kind of leftist socialist folks start to go, hey, wait, wasn't it the left that wanted guns? I mean, the Black Panthers were big gun rights people, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gene, thank you so much. Truly appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, reward Gene and his hard work. Go to CGF, California Gun Rights Foundation, make a little donation as a way of saying thanks. And I think, continue to look to CGF and Gene for big things in the future. So thank you so much for your time, Gene.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks, everybody.
All right. You ready? What's the curtain call this week, Alicia?
The current call this week, it's a very unfortunate one, and I imagine a lot of our listeners already are aware of it, but let's have it. It's a discussion. Let's have it. So what it is we have a tragic incident that happened in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where we had an 18-year-old high school student, he was a senior, named Michael Bosworth Jr., and he was fatally shot by a homeowner. And he was shot during a TikTok prank, doing something that I remember doing as a kid.
It was a TikTok prank.
They're calling it, yeah. They're calling it a TikTok prank, but really, you and I need. Come on, Mike. I'm sure you.
What was the prank?
Ding dong ditch.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I don't know if that's what we called it, but yeah.
That's what I called it back in the day. Yeah. Now they're calling it a TikTok prank. I mean, I guess everything they got to rebrand it as something new.
But it's where you go up to a door and you ring the doorbell and run.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what we called it, but I don't remember the term ding dong ditch.
Rich, did you have a name for it that was anything different? No? Same?
I like the alliteration, ding dong ditch.
Ding dong ditch. I mean, it's straight up, right?
At 3 a.m.?
At 3 a.m. See, that's something I didn't do.
I never did it at 3 a.m.
Neither did I.
I got to tell you, that's different.
That's pretty ballsy.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You do it after dark, it's a different world.
Right.
You do it after 10 p.m.? That's scary. Somebody at your door after, okay, keep going. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So what we had is there was a couple of kids. They were playing this, and like you said, at 3 a.m., right? So they went, they rang this bell, and what happened is the homeowner that was in the home believed that they were attempting to burglarize and or break in. So he, in that moment, fired.
Jeez.
So he, the student was an athlete at the school, right? He was killed. One of the other kids that was there with him as part of this prank was also hit. He was injured. The third kid was unharmed. The homeowner, unfortunately, is now facing charges of second-degree murder. Right? Malicious wounding, as well as other firearms offenses. And he's being held in custody without bond. So this is it's an important discussion. Let's have it.
It is. This is homeowner told investigators Bosworth and two other teens were trying to break into his home.
Correct.
On McKinsey Lane. The sheriff's office received a call about a residential burglary in progress in which a resident had fired shots. So, and then of course, unfortunately, this teen was taken to the hospital and died, which, by the way, he was a teen, 18, right? But
An adult.
This is an adult.
An adult.
This is an adult who did this.
Right.
This wasn't a child. This was
Correct.
an adult. Now, he was playing childish games, and he was, still in high school. I get that, but he was an 18-year-old adult. So, from the homeowner's perspective, this guy thinks he's stopping a break-in.
Correct.
And he's probably sincerely thinking that. He's probably terrified.
So, at 3 a.m. I mean, I have some thoughts. Unfortunately, there's at this point, I don't know if some more facts are going to come out, if we'll get more information. Don't know if it'll be held close in reports and not released, but I have some questions. First of all, if this was truly, because I honestly question, was this truly ding dong ditch? Right? Because if you ring the bell and run 3 a.m., I mean, even if our homeowner was awake, the time it takes to get to that firearm and then to be able to fire, I kind of find that some of these things just don't exactly fit. So our homeowner, believing that he had he was potentially experiencing a potential break-in, right? He pulled his firearm and he did what he felt he needed to do to defend himself. I did read another article where another neighbor where the kids had also done this said that it was more than just a ding-dong ditch, that it was a ringing of the bell and some aggressive pounding, banging, and really nasty rattling of the garage door and banging on the doors and windows. And if that's the case, that, in my opinion, really kind of lends to what would, in my mind, would make more sense as to why the homeowner here responded the way that he did.
I do have a question, though.
Yep.
How did he get a shot? Who opened the door? Like, why, if you are...
Did he shoot through the door?
Well, then he's wrong, right? If you shoot through a door,
That's
he's definitely wrong.
Right.
But the other thing is, if this guy is in danger... So I sincerely believe that he was scared.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I sincerely believe that that this person, the victim and his friends were pulling a prank. Like I think that's I tend to believe that. But here's the thing. Why did he open the door? If this guy was scared, why did he? The only way he could have gotten a shot off is if he opened the door. Why would you open the door? If somebody's trying to break in your house, the last thing you want to do is open the door. I think that kills the guy's kid. Now I don't see any details here, but
right.
How did the kid open the door? Well, he's not a kid. The 18-year-old open the door?
Right. Well, was the door opened or was he shot through?
Well, if he shot,
either way,
if you shoot,
he's got a problem.
Yeah, if you shoot through a door, you just shot somebody, and you're not in danger of being attacked.
Correct.
Because you got a door between you and the guy.
Right. Because but the way that the law works is you kind of I call them 4 legs of defense, like your defensive table. In order for someone to be considered a deadly threat, you have first of all they have to have the ability to cause death or great bodily harm.
Okay.
They then have to have the opportunity to use that ability, and as long as that door is sufficiently shut, windows are secured. There's not the
There's
opportunity.
no ability. There's no
opportunity. They have to have the intent, and then there has to be an imminence to it.
So we don't know if they had the intent. There's
Correct.
no way to know
Don't know.
that.
Don't know.
And it's his word against whatever.
Correct.
And then what was the fourth?
Imminence. There has to be an imminent risk of death or great bodily injury.
And with the door in the way, there is none
Correct.
of that. Now,
That's a problem.
if this guy who says he was scared of being attacked, if he removed the door, that's going to severely hurt his case.
Correct.
That he was in fear for his life.
Correct.
Because if you have a door between what you're afraid of and you're not afraid of what's behind that door.
Correct.
If you remove that door.
Right.
I think he's screwed.
I think he definitely is going to have a hard case. Definitely not.
Honestly, like I said, I tend to believe everybody in this. I think everybody's telling the truth. I tend to believe everybody's telling the truth. But I think this guy didn't take enough classes to understand, don't open the door. What are you doing? Opening the door.
What are you doing? One thing that I think is going to be what I would love to see, and not for the gruesome angle, but there's, of course, as part of this TikTok world that we're in, right? They were videotaping the whole thing. I mean, not that I want to see the gruesome, the gruesome stuff, but I want to see what's the truth. How did it really go down? Right?
Yeah.
Did he open the door? Did the kids maybe open the door? There were 3 of them. Maybe, there's so much speculation. There's so many things we can say. What if this? What if that? Maybe this, maybe that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, as long as that door is sealed, doors and windows are not, they have the integrity of the seal and they're closed. There's no opportunity.
Yeah. And if the victim and his friends opened the door,
that's different.
That's not a prank anymore.
Right.
You're
Absolutely.
breaking and entering.
And that's really what I personally am questioning was this really truly a prank? Because that doesn't seem to fit.
Well, I guess it's...
In my opinion.
I guess it's hinged on the door. Okay, it's not the time for a dad joke, Mike. Come on, this is serious. Okay, well, this is truly tragic, and I got to tell you, I really, truly feel bad for the victim and his family. I feel bad for the person who felt like he was defending his home. This whole situation is sad and tragic. We don't know what happened.
We don't.
But it sounds like both sides could have done with
better.
A lot more education. I don't know. I guess there's a possibility that the person who shot was completely in the right. We just don't know the details.
Correct.
And maybe they did everything correct. So I guess we just need some more details.
Definitely an important thing for us as gun owners who have a home, live in a home, apartment, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Understand that the way that the rules and the laws are is that you truly need to be an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm before you take this step. Right? Simply afraid, fear is reasonable. But unless the fear raises to the level of being that you're afraid of death or great bodily injury, oftentimes other options would be more appropriate. The gun can't be the answer to everything. That's important.
Yeah. Well. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. There you go. That's our curtain call. All right. Okay, we're talking to a friend of the show, attorney extraordinaire Gary Gibson. We've had him on a number of times. He is a pit bull of a defense attorney here in San Diego, and he is a dedicated Second Amendment guy. And he had a very interesting case that I wanted to talk about the details of, because it's kind of a temperature check when it comes to Second Amendment, and specifically the city attorney's office in the city of San Diego. So, Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. So you just had a really interesting case, which is in some ways funny and in some ways not funny in any way. So why don't you give us the details of as many details as you can of what happened with your most recent client here?
Sure. So somebody approached me, and this is probably 3-4 months ago, and they said, I'm getting charged with a crime. I said, well, tell me what happened. He goes, well, I've got this 1911 45 caliber pistol, TRP, nice gun, by the way. Not many rounds through it. And I took it to the range, and I wanted to put some rounds down range. And I wound up not getting the ejection that I needed. Let's say extraction. It wasn't pulling out of the chamber after the round was fired. And it kept jamming, and you couldn't figure out why. And the gun was a little old, and he didn't use it very much. In fact, it probably 100 rounds or less through the barrel. And he took it home and said, well, let me try and clean it. He went out to his garage, and he went to his workbench, and he broke the gun down, and he cleaned it, and he put it back together. And then he made his first mistake. He wanted to see if it was going to extract after he cleaned it. So he tried that with live rounds. He put a live round into the chamber, and it extracted. And then he put a live round into the chamber and shot himself through the hand. Because in order to work the slide on the 45, you generally have to put your hand over the top to work the slide, make it come back. Either that or you got to pull it from behind, which probably would have been the safest option. But his hand was covering the muzzle, and he shot himself directly through the hand with a 45 caliber bullet, which hurts.
Yeah, it hurts. Hurts physically. It hurts your pride. There's a lot of hurt there. But okay, he unintentionally shot himself. He was doing something that I think most gun owners would describe as not responsible. Like this isn't normal operating procedure when it comes to firearms. He probably should have used a dummy round or whatever. There's plenty of criticism to levy onto this guy, but
absolutely. I mean, he could have used a blank brass and an expended cartridge. He could have used that. I mean, it would have been the same thing. That's what's coming out, not a live. An expended cartridge is coming out.
At the very least, he could have just not touched the trigger. That might have solved some problems there. But anyway, so then what happened though? So okay, he now has a pretty serious injury, and I'm assuming he has to go to the hospital.
Yeah, it's that old line: no pull, no boom. And he pulled and boomed. The thing one of the things he was most pissed about was the bullet went through the hand directly in the center of the hand, and went into the light fixture of his car because it was in the garage, and that cost him a good bit of money to replace the light assembly. The bullet never left the garage. Bullet was embedded in the light assembly after going through his hand. And he was bleeding. So he drove himself to the hospital. Now, when you get to a hospital in California and you have a gunshot wound, they are mandatory reporters. So the cops showed up at the hospital, spoke to him, took a report. Cop said, okay, and went away. He fixed his hand, went home the next day, same day. Had some surgery in his hand because the hand's got a lot of bones in it, a lot of nerves, a lot of muscles, and he wants it to function. So he had surgery on it and was gone after that. A little while later, he got a notification complaint from the San Diego City Attorney's Office. He had committed a crime.
Here we go.
According to the San Diego City Attorney. Any idea what crime he had committed?
Discharge of a firearm in city limits?
That'd be my bet. Is that what it was? Discharge of a firearm within city limits?
What do you think?
Something along the lines of negligence, maybe?
Discharging firearm within the city limits. That is exactly what he was charged with. The city attorney charged somebody for shooting themselves accidentally.
In their own home. Projectile never left the home.
Projectile never left the home. This isn't some drunk idiot going out on New Year's Eve firing rounds into the air. This is some lawful gun owner doing something that he probably shouldn't have done without the intent to discharge the firearm and wound up shooting himself.
And this is, again,
costing himself a lot of time, money, and pain.
And this is no longer Mara Elliott, although it's still, her office in the sense that everybody that works there was pretty much hired and trained by her. They just switched over to a new guy, Brian Manshire.
Heather Ferbert.
Oh, I'm sorry, Heather. Yeah, Heather Ferbert. So, but she was trained by, she's like Mara Elliott Jr. Like, there's no daylight between those two. She was hired to continue to do all the things that Mara Elliott was doing. It is an extremist office as far as being anti-gun. I mean, they are extremely anti-gun. We've talked about them before. So what's the harshest punishment for this violation? Had he been convicted and they threw the book at him, what would be the harshest punishment for this?
Well, he hired me and we went to court. And I show up in court and he's been charged with a municipal code violation, not a penal code violation, a municipal code violation, a City of San Diego ordinance.
I'm curious.
And that municipal code violation is a misdemeanor. And that misdemeanor carries with it a maximum punishment of 6 months in custody and a $1,000 fine. So when we show up in court, I'm expecting a quick dismissal and an apology because this clearly was filed in error. No rational and reasonable prosecutor would think that, yeah, I'm going to charge somebody after he shoots himself accidentally in his garage. But this prosecutor did. And you're right on that. Heather Ferbert is an acolyte of Mara Elliott. Mara Elliott was in power for 8 hours and became the leading light of the anti-gun movement in the United States.
Yeah, 8 years. She was in office for 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. So you're right on that most of the prosecutors in her office were hired by Mara Elliott. Let's say probably close to 40-50% of them came through her watch.
What was can you talk about the interaction between you and the prosecutor when you what was their attitude towards the case? Are you able to go into that?
Sure. The prosecutor in the courtroom was quite reasonable. He wasn't the person that had filed the case. Mm-hmm. He understood my position, may not have agreed with it, but understood it. But here's the kicker. I'll give you a guess. What was their offer to settle the case? Now, this is a 60-plus-year-old retired veteran with no criminal history. Never been arrested or charged with a crime, never been investigated for a crime, served his country honorably for 30 years, retired from the military, and is now a senior citizen. What does a reasonable prosecutor offer that person for a negligent discharge, harming only himself? I
don't know which way to go with this. I'm going to say like some. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say like some minimal jail time, like or something like that. A week, a month in jail or something like that. I don't know.
They didn't go for jail, but they did want to place this retired veteran senior citizen on 1 year of probation, and they wanted him to pay a multi-dollar fine, and they wanted him to destroy his gun, and they wanted him to have a Fourth Amendment waiver, meaning that he could be searched and seized at any time without probable cause.
Jeez.
Was there a specific charge?
Well, we're not done yet. They wanted him to work on the freeway for 5 days, and they wanted him to destroy his $1,400 gun.
Just that gun, or would he have ended up being a prohibited person for a while, or?
He wouldn't have been a prohibited person for that municipal code violation.
But just that gun, they specifically said that gun that you used, even though I'm sure this guy had other firearms, that gun has to be destroyed?
Well, clearly, Michael, that gun is evil.
Yeah.
And that gun must be destroyed.
That gun now has a taste for blood, Gary. So
it does. You
got to put it down.
It's like guns are like pit bulls.
Yeah.
You can never tell when they're going to get up on their own and attack somebody.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's amazing.
So I was astonished. Literally, my jaw dropped. And I've been doing this 34 years. My jaw dropped when I saw that. And I said, you can't. I was looking around, like I was looking at the cameras in the courtroom, wondering if this was like a candid camera test to see how I would react, to see if I'd lose my crap.
You're getting punked by Ashton Kutcher. Not this time. This was real life.
I expected him to come through the back and say I was being punked, based on what they were offering. It was staggeringly ridiculous.
So what was the result? How did it end for your client?
Well, I was fully intended to say, screw you guys. I'm going to take you to trial, but I didn't want to have my client pay for that. I'd probably done it for free. They weren't getting a conviction on this. There was no willfulness. There was no intent. There was no knowledge. They can't get a negligent discharge in the sense of, it's not gross negligence. It's just simple, ordinary negligence. So I was convinced I would have won a trial, but I didn't want to go that route. And I asked them to dismiss, and they wouldn't. And the middle ground they came up with, well, let's do diversion, which is the client doesn't plead guilty, but he has to jump through a lot of hoops. And, 6 months, a year down the road, it'll be dismissed. And I wasn't a fan of that either. What did we settle on? We settled on a speeding ticket. My client pled guilty to an infraction through me. He wasn't in court. And he paid a $200 fine.
$200 fine, and it wasn't a misdemeanor. It certainly wasn't a felony, and he's good to go.
He's good to go. Walks away. It doesn't exist anymore. Paid his $200, no probation, nothing else. He kept his gun, which, by the way, I bought from him because I'm a fan of evil guns, and so I added that to my collection. The only gun in my collection that's ever shot anybody.
You're like the what's that guy, Caesar Milan? You're like the Caesar Milan of
the gun whisperer
of 1911. Yeah, you're the gun whisperer.
I go out and whisper to that gun in my gun safe every now and again, just to be sure that we're on good terms.
Yeah. Well, awesome job for your client. I just wanted to get the details there and talk about just how bad the San Diego City Attorney's Office is. Anything else? Any other details you want to, or anything else you want to say about?
I just think this is a perfect encapsulation of the knee-jerk anti-gun, gun-hating, Second Amendment hating, gun owner hating philosophy of the San Diego City Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
And here's a perfect example, and I'm not just making this up as hyperbole. The state of California has 35 million people. The county of San Diego has 3.5 million people, about. That means we have 10% of the population of California. We file 33% of the gun violence restraining orders filed in California come out of San Diego County. And they're specifically because of Mara Elliott and her desire to abolish both the Second Amendment and gun owners who have a right to have their own gun. She has trained, when she was in office, most of the state on how to file gun violence restraining orders. If you think the gun violence restraining order process is being abused in the state of California, particularly in the city of San Diego, Mara Elliott is almost exclusively responsible for your belief that it is being abused. And nothing has changed. Heather Furbert is just Mara Elliott 2.0 with regard to citizens' gun rights.
No. And I want to talk more about that. Thank you, Gary. Awesome job. Thank you so much for all that you do for your clients and for Gun Owners Radio and San Diego County Gun Owners. You are truly a blessing here in San Diego, and I appreciate your commitment to the rule of law and helping people in the Second Amendment. You're awesome. Thank you, Gary. And thank you for, by the way, your seminar that you did last Wednesday was phenomenal. I'm getting all kinds of feedback. People loved it. I thought it went really, really well. What to do after a defensive gun use. It went over like gangbusters. So thank you for all that you do.
Thanks. I really enjoyed that. And the best part of it was I left with that magnificent floral centerpiece that is now sitting on my dining room table. So I am forever indebted to San Diego County Gun Owners for that floral centerpiece.
Awesome. All right, cool, Gary. Thanks so much for visiting with us. Appreciate you telling the story. Okay, our interviews are brought to you by Cargo, cases and rugged gear outfitters in El Cajon. These guys are absolutely fantastic. If you haven't visited them, you have to visit them. You have to check them out and become a customer today. Go to cargostores.com if you want to buy online and check out their website, or go to 423 Broadway in El Cajon and visit them in person. We actually have a very cool thing today. It is a CFAC. You've heard of an IFAC, which is an individual first aid kit. This is a CFAC, which is a car first aid kit. And this is by Cargo. They put it together. It's packed with everything you need for basic first aid, all the way up to critical trauma tools, like a cat tourniquet, Israeli bandage, and a SAM splint. If you don't know what those things are, then you need to attend one of the classes that we have that will teach you exactly what these things are and what they're used for. It's actually a $205. This is it, right?
That's it.
Look at that. It's a $205 kit, and you keep this in your car.
And it comes with a cool bag to put it all in.
It comes with a very cool bag to put it in. This is the cool bag. This whole thing
That's even better.
goes in this backpack, and then you keep it in your car. And this was all put together by Cargo. So plus it comes with the awesome backpack with the molly straps and pockets for everything you could possibly need. You can fit that whole CFAC in there and then some. It's super organized. It's designed to fit all the essential materials, not take up a bunch of space in your car. We actually recently had a really cool first aid class with Erin Pettengill.
Yep.
And she's from Personal Protection Academy up in the Inland Empire. She partnered with Cargo. We all partnered together to bring you this class, and we went through how to use this CFAC. Here's the best part. If you took the class, or if you sign up for the next class, you're actually going to get a really cool special discount on the kit. So don't wait. Keep an eye out. Sign up for the next class and grab your CFAC. The CFAC is extremely cool. It's something we want to make sure that you take advantage of. Talk to Cargo Stores. Go to cargostores.com. Great products, great prices, and an uncommonly good service. Cases and Rugged Gear Outfitters. So if you take the class, this $205 kit will only be $105. So you're actually getting $100 off this really amazing kit.
They're losing money on the kit.
But
I know the cost of those things.
Right? So
Yeah.
you get the education,
Yep.
you get the kit and the backpack, and you get $100 off, which is amazing. So you get all that education, you get all that equipment. Whether or not you take the class, go check out this kit, but take the next class, get the discount, and be prepared. You know, the likelihood of you needing to perform first aid, I've had to do it on the freeway,
Yep.
and this is a fantastic kit. So check it out. Thank you so much, Cargo, for supporting us. Support them because they support your Second Amendment rights. Thank you, Cargo. I want to tell you guys a story about just how extreme the city attorney's office is. And you know, I thought that was an important story to talk about, just exactly what we're up against. You know, we're not just up against some crazy protesters, some people that you see saying crazy stuff online and wearing orange shirts or whatever the color of their stupid shirts are. You know, this is your government. This is the city attorney's office for the city of San Diego. Now, if you don't live in the city of San Diego, you're safe. But the city of San Diego is like almost half the county. I mean, almost half the population lives within the city of San Diego, and they are this irresponsible and this hostile towards your Second Amendment rights. This is serious business. And it wasn't just the last person, Mara Elliott, who's now gone and hopefully will never be anywhere near power again. Hopefully she'll never hold public office ever again. But now you have, you know, her henchman has moved up and is now basically has the exact same attitude towards your Second Amendment rights, towards gun owners. But I want to talk to you. I want to tell you a story. I've touched on this story before, but this is a good opportunity to really go into some details. Back in March of 2020, it was actually the week before the COVID shutdowns. I was invited to go to a meeting hosted by ATF at the Federal Building downtown here in San Diego. And it was meant for the FFLs. That was the audience, were San Diego FFLs. And it was presented as kind of a routine, update kind of meeting. I was surprised when I showed up there that there were very few FFLs, and there were a couple I didn't even recognize. And I pretty much know all the FFLs in San Diego. So it was a fairly empty room, but across the room there were a bunch of suits, and I thought that was odd. I thought maybe they were going to be part of the presentation. They looked like they were dressed I thought they were part of the ATF or something like that. So at the time, they kicked off with a presentation by he's the federal district attorney. So if you break the law in this part of the country and it's a federal law, this guy, he's the federal district attorney. His last name was Brewer, and really good dude. This is under the Trump administration. He gave a great speech. It was actually very motivating. And frankly, the whole speech was, we need your help, FFLs, in going after drug cartels, which is motivating. Hey, okay, yeah, we don't want bad guys to get guns. So if drug cartels, if FFLs can play a part in stopping drug cartels from, taking guns and giving them to bad people to do bad things, well, let's pitch in. Let's roll up our sleeves and do it. That was the attitude I got from the FFLs that were there. And I thought, hey, this is great. Well, he gave his speech and then walked out. And then it was turned over to basically the head of the ATF in Southern California. And they started talking about, we got this form and we want to make sure that you're filling out section 3 of this form correctly, whatever. And I started thinking to myself, the rest of this meeting is going to be boring. I'm probably not. It's going to be, pointed towards FFLs, and I don't think I can get anything out of this meeting. And I thought, what I do want to talk about, though? I want to see if I can get some insight into what is the proper way to do an interfamilial transfer of a firearm that is not on the roster. So, for example, you have a parent who lives in Arizona, and they want to gift you a Gen 5 Glock, which isn't on the safe handgun roster. At the time, it was even worse. There were very few guns that were on the roster. Now we're starting to see more on the roster. But the process and procedure wasn't real clear. And I had already seen some people get into trouble trying to obtain off-roster pistols, and they weren't attempting to break the law. They thought they were complying with the law, but then it turned out they weren't. And then FFLs, I'd talked to different FFLs, and everybody kind of had a different procedure. And some of the FFLs just said, we're not going to mess with it. It's too messy. We don't want to break the law. So I thought, well, at the very least, maybe I'll bring this up. He's probably not prepared to talk about it, but let's see if, we can get some clarification. So after he was done explaining his slide, I said, hey, I got a question, and asked him about interfamilial transfers of off-roster pistols, interstate. The next slide was all about that. And the next few slides were all about it. And basically this ATF guy, the whole point of his presentation after this mundane section about a form and how to fill it out correctly, the rest of the presentation was telling FFLs, if you're doing these transfers, we're going after you and we're going after the people who are receiving, the Californians that are receiving these transfers. They were adamant. And the next question was, well, wait a minute, this is state law and you're federal law enforcement. And he was prepared for that. He had a whole slide on the various ways, the various laws that they feel that Californians are breaking when they do an interfamilial transfer of a roster of a pistol that's not on the safe handgun roster. And it had to do with lying on a federal form. It had to do with interstate commerce. But they basically were like, yep, if you are breaking this, if you're doing this procedure, if you're breaking this state law, according to them, breaking the state law, then you are also breaking federal law and we can enforce it. And he introduced a guy who was an expert at tracking the money. If you received a gun, then they were actually looking at bank accounts. If you received a gun from somebody out of state, and as a gift, then they were actually looking at bank accounts. Did $500 or $600 or $1,000 leave your account, and then did it show up in their account? Like, they were tracking people's financial business in order to catch them doing the, an interfamilial transfer, because it has to be a true gift, right? You can't actually purchase it, because that's a whole other set of.
So they were looking at the timing of the purchase versus the date of the transfer.
Correct, and an amount.
Trying to get
Right. Yeah.
evidence to prove a straw purchase.
Yeah, if a Glock's $600, and you were gifted it in January, well, did $600 leave your account, in early January, and then show up in their account in late January? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So this was serious business, and I remember, basically, the questions were, well, wait a minute, the big boss that you had come and talk said you're going after cartels. You're going after gun cartels. Gun cartels don't care if they have a Gen 5 Glock or a Gen 3 Glock. Like, this isn't going after, cartels. And it became very clear, crystal clear, that this was an initiative of this, head honcho here in Southern California, that this person decided that is what they're going to concentrate on. They weren't going to go after criminals, right? They're going after people that are just trying to obtain normal guns in what they think is a legal way, in California. They decided that was the threat. They wanted to go right after gun owners, not gun owners that had a history of violence or a history of crime or anything. I got to tell you, I walked out of that meeting intimidated. And I am certainly not easily intimidated by a bunch of bureaucrats or whatever. But these federal agents and the fervor with which they were looking to bust gun owners was extremely intimidating. It was very worrisome. And they were going to go after the shops for lying on a form, breaking federal law, if they did these transfers. They were going to go after the receiver of the firearm, and they were going to go after the gifter of the firearm. And they were serious. They took a lot of time to make sure that people knew it was basically like never okay. It was never okay. And then another interesting thing happened. I walked out of there sincerely intimidated, which I believe was absolutely their purpose, was to scare and intimidate. And I rode down the elevator in the suits that I mentioned earlier, right? So there were a bunch of suits across the room that I didn't recognize. The suits were people from San Diego City Attorney's Office. They were there to get educated on how to more efficiently and easily go after gun owners. And they absolutely were interested in, hey, their questions were along the lines of, hey, how do we hang more people on this? How do we go after more people on this? How do we prosecute more people on this? There wasn't anything about crime. There wasn't anything about career criminals or stopping crime. It was absolutely geared towards gun owners who were simply trying to obtain normal firearms that are available to the rest of the country and in a way that they thought to be legal. They weren't there to clarify the law. They weren't there to say, hey, let's explain how this actually can be done. They were there to find gun owners and stop them from being gun owners and hang them. That ATF agent is a guy named Paul Ware, and I think we even have a picture of Paul. Paul Ware, W-A-R-E. Paul Ware was the head of that meeting. It was crystal clear that this was his initiative and his brainchild, that he was more than happy to go after gun owners. And I got to tell you, this guy was responsible for the whole attitude of the meeting, and he still works for ATF. And I know we've had a lot of discussions on the Trump administration and what they're doing, their DOJ, to help protect the Second Amendment, which is fantastic. They have Harmeet Dillon, who in their civil rights department that's going, hey, this is clearly a civil rights violation, what they're doing in certain states. They have Pam Bondi's office who's saying, hey, we're going to, protect the Second Amendment. We're not going to go after gun owners. They have, the ATF has changed. They've made a lot of positive changes. But for the first time, I'm publicly naming this guy, the Trump administration. If you guys want to help gun owners in California, get rid of Paul Ware. fire him. He should not be in a pro-Second Amendment position in the ATF. Not under the Trump administration. I don't care where he goes. I don't care what he does. But he should not be working for the ATF. He is absolutely a predator when it comes to going after sane, trained, law-abiding gun owners. This guy is not in it for, to protect the Constitution. He's certainly not in it to protect your guns. So he works for the ATF. He needs to go. He needs to be fired and let go. Gone. No more him in the Trump administration. And I also wanted to tell that story to further illustrate just how anti-gun the city attorney's office is in San Diego. So there you go. There's your story time for the day. Any comments, Alicia?
I don't like that story.
I got to tell you, I don't. If anything, I whitewashed that story. It was enormously intimidating. I'm not going to name the people I was there with, but I've talked to other FFLs that were there, and they changed the way they conduct business, not just when it comes to these interfamilial transfers and, roster, off-roster, guns, but the way that they actually formed their business entity. They put layers of protection because they walked out intimidated too. It was really, really horrible. I think, so then the next week, by the way, COVID happened and everything got shut down and the whole world changed. I think that if had COVID not happened, this initiative would have blown a lot of people up. I think COVID kind of derailed what they were attempting to do to an extent. But it was bad. It was really bad, Alicia.
Just processing that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, FFLs are already so under the watchful eye in so many ways. There's already so many ways that they're attempting to be shut down. Their businesses are affected. And I honestly wasn't aware of this one.
Yep. Pretty bad.
Unreal.
So, I don't know. I'm just a guy here in San Diego who, has a little podcast here and works 7 days a week on, a local Second Amendment organization. But I'm hoping to get this message about Paul Ware and the ATF as far up the chain as I can. And I hope they'll take this seriously and remove him from his position of power in the ATF. So there you go. All right. There's my story. Is he there? Awesome. All right. Time for everybody's favorite segment, Stump, my nephew. With Sam, my nephew, Sam the Gunman, is excellent when it comes to gun trivia. In fact, last week, this is kind of a part two, by the way, because last week, Barry from El Cajon tried to stump him, and it turned out that Barry got it wrong, and Sam got it right, and Barry is coming back for round two. But first, this segment is sponsored by Seal One, seal1.com. Seal One is a fantastic sponsor of the show. It's a quick tip to save you money and save you time and save you headache when it comes to cleaning. Ditch the three-step system and switch to Seal One. It's an all-in-one CLP that actually works. You just wipe it on to clean your gun, and then you wipe off Seal One, and that lubricates it. It's actually a dry lubrication. It's not a greasy, gross mess. There's not a bunch of bottles that you can, spill all over the bench and everything. It's a dry lube, so you just, you don't have to leave it sitting. You just wipe it on, wipe it off. One and done with Seal One. One product, one step. Total confidence. Seal One. Pick some up off their website or go to your favorite gun store and buy some Seal One. If they don't carry it, say, hey, I want my Seal One. So there you go.
Really quick about Seal One, I appreciate it doesn't burn my lungs when I breathe.
Yeah. It is. It's really good. All right. So we got a part two from Barry. Did you look into? I don't think you needed to look into that. You confirmed that you were right and he was wrong, and you got it right last week, right?
I wasn't able to find for sure. Granted, I didn't spend very long looking into this. I know there's an answer out there, but I wasn't able to find through my cursory research what the first metallic cartridge military bolt-action rifle was. But I did know right off the bat, as we saw on the radio last week, that it was not the Drycy. The Drycy used paper cartridges.
He got that wrong. Okay, well, here you go. Barry's back for round two. And so let's see how he does on this one. Ready, Alicia? Go
I'm
for it.
ready. All right, Sam, you ready?
I hope so.
All right. So the question from Barry from El Cajon is, what bolt-action rifle developed in the 1990s by a Norwegian designer was adopted by multiple countries and is renowned for its strong action and 5-round clip-loaded internal magazine, but is often confused with a similar rifle designed by a German counterpart?
There you go. Did you catch all that?
Barry from El Cajon, thanks for writing in again. I'm glad we didn't scare you off. It was what Norwegian rifle developed in the 1990s has a reputation for
1890s.
1890s. And is often confused with what?
With a similar rifle designed by a German counterpart.
Norwegian rifle, 1890s, clip-fed, internal magazine. Did he say the capacity?
No capacity is mentioned.
5-round clip-loaded internal magazine.
You're right. Thank you.
5-round clip-loaded internal magazine.
So
developed
bolt
by
action.
Norwegian.
So let me just hit the highlights. Bolt action, 1890s, Norwegian, adopted by multiple countries. 5-round clip-loaded internal magazine, and often confused with a similar rifle designed by a German counterpart.
Often confused with a similar rifle developed by a German counterpart. Now that part's throwing me off because I'm curious as to what the German counterpart is. The implication there, maybe I'm reading too much into the exact verbiage, but the implication seems to be that the rifles were similar. Well,
they look
the
similar.
only Norwegian bolt-action rifle of significant renown of which I'm aware, that's not to say it's the only one, it's the only one that I know much of anything about, is the Krag Jorgensen. And the multiple countries that adopted it militarily would be Norway, Denmark, and the United States. Norway and Denmark had that. Well, I don't know about Denmark for sure, but at least Norway had theirs in 6.5 Swede, whereas Sweden had Mausers, M96 Mausers, in the same chambering.
Okay, but can you spell
that might
Krag
be the
Jorgensen?
source of the confusion. What's that?
Okay, but can you spell Krag Jorgensen?
Ooh, with or without diacritics?
That's actually was going to be my next my next question.
Define diacritics.
Yeah. Wasn't diacritics?
Yes.
That was that book in the 70s that everybody was reading about. It's like a self-help book, diacritics, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I could tell you what the book is actually called, but I'm worried about getting sued for making any statement about it, given that much of your listening audience live in Southern California.
All right. That's a good
All
point.
right.
Okay, you're right.
Correct.
The Krag Jorgensen, which is KARG hyphen J.
K-R-A-G.
What is it?
K-R-A-G.
KRAG
Yeah,
hyphen.
Krag, not Clark.
All right. Jorgensen, which is J, something that looks like an O, R-G-E-N-S-E-N. You want to read the...
Yeah.
Okay,
So
go
yeah,
for it.
it is less familiar to casual enthusiasts compared to other bolt-action rifles like the Mauser, which it is often confused with due to their concurrent use in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, specifically the M1893 Spanish Mauser.
Awesome job. You nailed it.
Nailed it.
All right, Barry, you get it's a good question.
Wah, wah, wah.
You didn't stump him, but it was still you've redeemed yourself, Barry. So thank you so much for sending that in.
Yeah,
you get a hat
that's
or
a fun
shirt.
question. The Krag is a really neat rifle. One interesting aspect from my perspective as someone who enjoys historical research is that it was really only adopted by 3 companies. So were it not the standard U.S. Army long arm for a period of about 7 years, it would be this totally obscure off-the-wall thing that no one had ever heard of, because the only other 2 militaries that used it were the Norwegians and the Danish. But I've handled one. I haven't had a chance to fire one, unfortunately. I'd love to. One of my unicorn guns that, if I had all the money in the world and all the resources, I would track one down, is a Norwegian Krag in 6.5, because I hear it's a very smooth shooting cartridge. But just handling one when I was doing some other research in a weapons vault, just casual things I do for work. I was really impressed at how smooth the action is. And that's not something that really matters for a military rifle. But I immediately understood, just feeling the balance of it and feeling, working the bolt, working the controls. I immediately understood why it has such a nice reputation as a sporting rifle after they were withdrawn from U.S. military service. They were apparently popular for some decades as hunting and target shooting rifles on the civilian market as surplus, basically bubba examples.
Bubba examples?
Yeah, it seems, I know it has some mechanical issues for a military rifle of the time, but it seemed very well made, and again, the action was impressively smooth. I mean, you compare it to a Savage Axis or like a Ruger American or something. The American rifles are way rougher.
Well, there you go. All right, the Krag or Krog? Say it again. What's the name of it?
Well, I would pronounce it Krag Jorgensen, but then again, I'm an American, so I don't know.
That's the right answer.
Like that disclaimer.
All right, great job. That is our Stump the Nephew. Do you have time to hang out with us and talk at our straight shooter segment?
Sure.
Okay, cool, good. Got a couple of kind of an interesting thing. We're gonna talk about gun myths. So this is our shoot you straight segment. There's no bull, just straight shooting and talking about today's hottest gun and political topics. We've got a couple of cool things to talk about today. It is time for our straight shooter segment. So today I think I got to tell you, Sam, I think you're gonna be a huge benefit to this conversation. I wanted to talk about top 3 gun myths that gun owners are responsible for spreading that they're not true. And I don't think we don't need to spread these myths anymore. And I think what we're trying to do here is we're trying to downplay, pieces of the Second Amendment to make them more acceptable to people who don't like guns. So we kind of go, oh, it's just, gee golly, it's just not this big deal. When I think we're wrong. I think we're completely wrong for doing it. So gun myth number 1, and let's talk about it. Maybe you guys disagree. I don't know. I'm interested in hearing what people have to say. But the first one is, there's a couple of different variations of this, but that an AR-15, a semi-automatic civilian AR-15 or AR style or AR pattern rifle that you'd buy as a civilian, the myth is that it's drastically different from an M16. That it's completely and totally different. That no country would go to war with an AR, with a semi-automatic AR. And it's completely ridiculous for us to even for the other side to even suggest that an AR is like what they use in the military. That's a myth. It really actually is pretty identical.
Pretty darn it. One main key feature that's different. AR, one trigger pull, one shot.
Well, so what's interesting about that is what got me thinking about that is we actually had a guy on last week, a couple weeks ago. Brian was spent a career in special operations for the Navy. He was, he's an instructor. He was saw combat as a SEAL. And we were actually asking about foregrips. So then we asked him about full auto. And everyone I've talked to, their M16, their M4 really is what they're using, or whatever. Their AR style, whatever the version is. And there's a couple different versions. Obviously, Special Ops uses a different version than the grunts use. But they don't use full auto. And the Special Ops don't even use 3-burst. It's all semi-automatic. But here's what's important. So why? Why do we do this? I think what they're doing is they're hoping that the other side who's against us will see this as a completely different gun and leave it alone. And there's been no evidence that that's a fact. That they're not going to leave it alone. We're not going to fool them into believing that this is a completely and totally different gun, number 1. But number 2, the reality is the Second Amendment is there to protect guns that you can use to defend yourself when you're performing as a militia, when you're actually doing militia stuff. You know, in fact, we talked last week about the Miller case back in the 30s that the Supreme Court ruled on that had to do with we were talking about the NFA, and we talked about the Miller case. And the Supreme Court at that time said you can ban short barrel shotguns because they have no military use. And they were basically saying, the 1930 Supreme Court was saying, the only purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect arms that you would use in order to be a well-regulated militia. And, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we say, hey, this gun that you guys are trying to ban, it has no military use. Okay, well, then it can be regulated, that it's not protected by the Second Amendment. Now, I think that I can't think of a firearm that doesn't have some kind of military use, whether it's through training or actually carrying for self-defense. But it is a myth that I believe we should completely stop. We're splitting this hair as if the ARs that we purchase and buy for self-defense, for sport, for collecting are significantly different than the types of firearms that are used in the military. There's a myth that I think gun owners are perpetuating that we should completely stop. In fact, I think we're wrong on that. What say you, Alicia? What do you got?
I agree. I mean, it's you. The problem is, we talked about integrity earlier, right? Yeah. If we try to take the argument from two different sides to try to meet whatever our needs are, we're kind of screwing ourselves. So you gotta kind of pick your stance and stick with it. I
think so. I think if you break that, if you take an M16, okay, out of the museum at this point, that's the only place you can find an M16. But let's say you take an M4 that standard issue M4, and you completely break it down and put it on the other end of this table, and then you take my AR, and you break it down and put it on this end of the table. The parts are the same. You know what I mean? They're very, very 99% of the parts are the same, and the function of it has become the same. Sam, what do you think? Am I right? Am I way wrong, or what am I not considering?
I'd like to address the two arguments you just made in reverse order. Your second point was that it's important to make this connection because the Second Amendment specifically protects the right to keep and bear arms in militia type use. And that's something that's really not well understood by some people. So I'll just go over the highlights. The understanding of the people who wrote and passed the Second Amendment at the time, 1791, 1792, was that the militia referred to something composed of the body of the people, the body of the citizenry, which, if you read the original Militia Act passed by the Second Congress right after the Second Amendment, it specifies that it was composed of the body of the citizenry at that time. Now, there were stipulations as to who that was. Not everyone was represented, but the understanding was it was a common thing. Second, the National Guard is not what is referred to. The National Guard didn't really exist in its modern form until the early part of the last century, and didn't exist at all until a few decades prior to that. Although some militia units were standardized as National Guard regulars, if you will, that isn't the Second Amendment does not protect the existence of the National Guard. There are no other parts of the U.S. Constitution that refer to a power the government has, which would be to raise the National Guard or something like that as a right. There's no such thing as a collective in the understanding of the Constitution. And third, what you pointed out, Michael, the first time the NFA went to court, which is the foundation of all federal firearm legislation, gun control legislation in the United States, when it was upheld in the Supreme Court in the late 50s, the understanding was that it was to protect the right of average people to own military equivalent arms, which was considered normal in times past. The fact that there's this distinction made now between like military style versus Grandpappy's old hunting rifle, which may very well be mechanically identical to a Mauser, for example.
Right.
This is a complete historical aberration. Now,
so
as for your
wait a minute. So you agree with me on that point, right?
Yes, I do.
Good. He started in. I thought this little guy likes to prove me wrong, so I started getting a little nervous and worried. I thought he was going to embarrass his uncle. But okay, we agree. Good.
No,
excellent.
well,
keep going.
As for the first thing you said, I prefer to take a little bit less of a cynical approach, and I think of the separation between M16s and M4s, military type ARs versus civilian type ARs, falls within the category of lies to children. All of us, or most of us at least, know or ought to know that it's a fine distinction that has to be made. But if you try to sit down with an anti-gunner or someone who's just completely uninformed on the topic and talk about third pinholes and out of battery safeties and disconnectors, their eyes will glaze over within the first 6 words.
Right.
So I think that where this myth comes from and why it became, I hate to say it, but why it became necessary was to make the distinction in people's minds that when you walk into your neighborhood gun store and buy an AR, it's not a machine gun that someone is going to go out and immediately use to mow down a large crowd of people or do some other horrific act, because the image in people's minds when they see a civilian AR, and when they've seen civilian ARs since they became available in the 60s, really, was of your Rambo action movie kind of nonsense with someone hip firing and spraying out an improbably large number of rounds that magazine can't fit because of Hollywood magic. So in short, the myth comes from a good place, and it's important to make that distinction, but it runs the risk of dominating the conversation about the AR platform and other types of popular firearms that appear similar to military firearms, or that I should say that appear similar to what people see in action movies as what the bad guys are using, because that's really what it is. It's all about perception.
Agreed. Okay. Next myth. So I think we all generally agreed.
Right.
Okay. Next myth is that, and this is kind of related, is that 5.56 ammo, that ARs use, isn't really all that powerful. Your grandfather's deer rifle was more powerful than a 5.56. I mean, 5.56, for God's sakes, that's practically a 22, and no one's buying that either.
I think what they're confused by is the size of the round.
Well,
it's not overly huge, but they're talking about power.
I think
Power is different.
What they're trying to do is confuse anti-gunners by the size of the round. In fact, I remember it was after NRA did a big presentation, like on like a TV presentation on one of the Fox News or something like that, and they actually took a target and they shot it with a deer rifle, and they shot it with an AR, and they showed the difference between the size of the hole. So I think what gun owners are trying to do is confuse anti-gunners by showing them the size. But we're not really telling the truth here. I mean, the reality is, 5.56 is minimum of, well, it depends. But I mean, typically 2,700 feet per second to 3,300 feet per second.
It's pretty powerful.
It's pretty powerful.
Yep.
No one's, first off, I don't want to get shot by a 22. I don't want to get shot by a 22. Nobody wants to get shot by a 5.56. The wounds of a 5.56 are devastating. It's lethal force, and it's meant to be lethal force. Now, I also understand that there's this whole thing. Well, it was meant to injure and not kill, and it tumbles.
I need to stop you right there. The meant to injure thing is complete nonsense. I don't know where that.
Well, that's where I was going. It's complete nonsense. Like, this whole thing's complete nonsense. Now, the other side has their own nonsense. We just heard recently how I think it was one of the idiots on The View said that you can't hunt with an AR because it'll completely obliterate and blow their lungs out or whatever. I mean,
that's like Biden with the 9mm comment, right? It'll blow the lungs out of your body.
Yeah,
they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's not
like what 9mm is he buying? Can I get some of that?
So the idea that 5.56 isn't that powerful, and gee, why are we even trying to ban it? Total myth perpetuated by gun owners in an attempt to try to convince anti-gunners something that is not effective. Like, I don't think we should do it. All right, Alicia, what do you think? Yeah, any other thoughts on that?
I think there's a divide in there. I think that you have a lot of people that are like you say are trying to minimize and trying to kind of deceive. And then I think there's a lot of people in the gun world that don't do their research and that believe it, and I think they're buying into it too. I think quite a bit.
I think this is another lies to children type thing. This is a useful myth that comes from a need to break conditioning that people have that doesn't really come from facts. And what I mean by that specifically is that there has been a concerted effort over time, and I've seen it less recently, I think, but that's just a gut feeling. I don't have a way to measure this, but there's been a concerted effort to portray AR-style firearms as unreasonable for civilian ownership by framing them as high-powered rifles, in air quotes. And so the idea is, oh, this is the implication is, the insinuation is to that, oh, this is way more devastating than anything a normal person owns. To fool people who don't really know about the issue, and to make people think that they're anti-gun when what they really are is just uninformed or misinformed.
Right.
I will say this: if you want to actually compare kinetic energy delivery, which stopping power isn't a thing, it's hard to quantify in terms of number, but the best we have is kinetic energy. A 5.56 round is, approximately delivers approximately half as much as a 30-06 or a civilian spec 30-06 or 308.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why
half of a whole lot is still
a lot.
Oh,
lot,
sure.
you
Yes.
know?
It's absolutely a lethal round. And if you think about it for 5 seconds, then the idea of something being unreasonable because it's a high-powered rifle, quote unquote, completely falls apart. Because if we start with the understanding that someone might need to use a firearm for self-defense because it lethally incapacitates an attacker, then you would want something as powerful as possible, right? Logically.
Right. Absolutely.
But the you're not allowed to hunt with it thing is completely out of left field. It's a total non sequitur. The reason, first of all, the reason in places like Virginia, for example, why you're not allowed to use 223 or 5.56 for deer hunting is because there is a minimum caliber, so diameter of the projectile requirement. And that's based on the fact that deer and other game animals have different anatomy from humans, and the intent is to ensure an ethical kill by making sure people are not using rounds that are not powerful enough. So the assumption is that something like a 308 or 30-06 will be more likely to more reliably put down a deer ethically, instantly, without it bleeding out and suffering. It has nothing to do with anything about what people should or should not, or the military utility of the cartridge, or the self-defense utility of the cartridge, or anything in that realm. It's again,
there's no case to be made that a 5.56 won't stop an attack.
Right. That's the point.
Which
that's
is what
why we
all
own
of us
guns.
are going. So I do think, and I'll tell you, the third one is, before I go into the third one, I want to make sure people understand that what I'm saying here is we're in 2025. It's a different time and a different place. We have culture on our side now. We have legal precedent on our side. We have laws. We have all kinds of stuff on our side. And I think that people were being timid and apologetic about their Second Amendment. And we don't have to do that anymore. We are the good guys. We're sane, trained, law-abiding, peaceable people. So we don't have to make these excuses. We don't have to split these hairs. We should have the confidence, not the arrogance, but the confidence to say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is what we own, and here's why. So I don't think we need to have to say, well, gee golly gosh, I don't have a gun that's going to hurt anybody. This is lethal force. I mean, I think you put it really well with the term lies to children. There is no Santa Claus, and I want to own an AR-15 for self-defense, and so that one day if there ever is a need for a well-regulated militia, I'm prepared. I'm part of that well-regulation. So here's the third one. We talked about we started to go into it, Alicia, but the other myth is that a suppressor doesn't help that much.
And those are people who've never shot one.
They've never shot one, but it does. Here's the thing: I want a suppressor that makes it completely and totally silent. You know, so the idea that like, oh gosh, it doesn't really, it's not really that whatever. I mean, it does help. It helps people not go deaf. It does help. There are suppressors. Dakota was talking about how she went and shot some suppressed firearms. And, they were pistol caliber, but she was able to do it without, ear protection. They don't recommend it. You still got to wear the ear protection. Right. But the idea that a suppressor doesn't really do much, it doesn't do as much as I want it to do. I want my gun to be completely and totally silent. And that isn't bad. I'm not a bad guy for that. We're not going to stop crime making guns louder. It's a total, ridiculous argument that they try to use against us. So I think this idea that suppressors don't really do all that. I mean, they're really just a technicality. No, suppressors make it silenter. Silenter, and I want it to be completely silent eventually, and I'm not a bad guy for that, and I'm not going to apologize for it. So I think that the suppressor thing that we try to downplay, I think it could be categorized as one of the myths. So, Alicia, what do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Where am I?
I think you're right, and I think I would love, like going back to the discussion that we had before with the House versus the Senate, I would love to see them try one before they vote, because I think a lot of people have a misconception. Like if a lot of us, especially here in California, we don't have an opportunity for suppressors. So what do we know? We know what we see in movies,
right?
And that is nowhere near the reality of what it is. And I think a lot of people, especially those who vote, if they're voting with that knowledge or what they think is knowledge, it's a misconception.
But to be clear, if they came out with a complete, total silencer that brought the decibels down to 0, I still want it, and it should still be legal. And you know what I mean? So, Sam, what do you think? Am I off on this? Am I on to something? What are your thoughts?
I think to make a broad statement about not just this myth, but the three of them, it's really a sad state of affairs that these even have to exist. That
Agreed.
That we're at a point where we're talking about, again, to use that same term, lies to children having been taken to the extreme, because when you're trying to debate, or I should say have a conversation with someone about firearms and about gun control and about the right to self-defense, very often you're coming from the perspective of understanding the issue and having a personal connection to it and knowing the topic and knowing the technology, even just as an average random gun owner off the street, versus the person on the other side's knowledge of firearms comes entirely from action movies. It's sad, it's depressing. But like if the types of firearms and firearm accessories that dumb, uninformed, rabidly anti-gun people pretend existed, that would be great. Like, where can I buy that? Where can I buy the
right?
Now I wish Santa Claus does
where
exist.
Can I buy
I got a new list.
the gun that weighs 3 ounces and can fire 100 bullets in half a second and all that stuff. Like, that would be amazing technology. That would be revolutionary. But yeah, silencers don't make firearms silent. The best you can get is a manually operated 22, like a bolt action, with a large volume integral suppressor that is exactly 22 caliber, I should say, .224 caliber. And then and only then can you get it to can you get a firearm to the level of almost movie quiet. And we all know that. All of us know that. All of us know that people cannot walk around and be able to shoot someone in a crowded public space like an assassin and no one else would hear it. Right. But that's what people think because they watch too many action movies. And it's unfortunate that that's what we're fighting against.
I agree. Well, there you go. I will end with this. You know, obviously I work for San Diego County gun owners. And, the Second Amendment protects my right to keep and bear arms. But the reality is I'm not in this for guns. Guns just happen to be the best self-defense tool, the most effective self-defense tool that man has ever invented. If they came up with a small fob for my keychain that all I had to do was press a button and whoever was threatening me or my life was instantly incapacitated, I would probably switch that out for firearms immediately. This isn't about a hobby. This isn't about, having fun at the range. This is about self-defense. This is about defending myself. And I'm not alone on that. There are a lot of people that enjoy the sport and hobby of guns, and that's great. I do too. But that's not what this is ultimately about. People aren't streaming through the doors of gun ranges and buying guns and getting training and carrying and getting permits and doing all that they do for a simple hobby. They're doing it to defend their life. They're doing it to protect themselves from, horrible, horrible attacks. And right now, a firearm is the most effective self-defense tool there is. So that's the reality of this thing. It's not about the guns. It's about the right. It's about the self-defense. And that's really, really what we are focused on here. That's your show. That's Gun Owners Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Producer Rich. Awesome job as always. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Sam the Gunman. Stump my nephew. Awesome job as always. Thank you, Gene, for the interview. Gene Hoffman. And, of course, Gary Gibson. You guys all did a fantastic job. And thank you, the listener. Don't forget to subscribe. Help us out. Super easy. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mike, too.